The opinions expressed by tonight's guest do not represent the opinions or position of Spaced Out Radio, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with SOR Media. Listener discretion is advised. Here at Spaced Out Radio, we are about to take you higher. Broadcasting from the Rocky Mountains of Colorado to you listening around the world. This is Spaced Out Sunday with host Tessa Nicole Thomas. You can follow Tessa on our Facebook page at Spaced Out Radio, on Twitter at Tessa TNT, and you can subscribe to her YouTube channel. Go to youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio for the archive. But we break on command 'cause women rule the world. Buckle up, space travelers. Let the countdown begin.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
It's time to go for a ride with host Tessa Nicole Thomas.
I'm such a lucky guy, 'cause after all this time, it's like the deeper I go, the deeper I fall.
Good evening, Spaced Out Radio. Secure your tinfoil hats, buckle down tight, and hold on loosely as we soar over the rocky tops of the La Platas on a Rocky Mountain high, get sucked into the vortex of the Four Corners area, and settle down snugly at mile marker 419.9 in colorful Colorado. It is Saturday, July 7th, Sunday the 8th. For those of you on the East Coast and beyond, this is Spaced Out Radio. Hope you had a rockin' week, an awesome day, and an even better evening. I am your host, Tessa Nicole Thomas, and I am live tonight broadcasting from beautiful, colorful Colorado. We are 150,000 strong. Nightly on Spaced Out Radio Network, spacedoutradio.com, Spreaker, Paranormal Radio, TalkStream Live, as well as Deep Talk Radio, which you can find at deeptalkradio.com. Don't forget to head to our website, spacedoutradio.com, where you can peruse the Spaced Out Radio store and read the encounter online dealing with everything strange, paranormal, and odd. Tonight, I have a treat for all you guys and gals out there. Tonight, we will be speaking to and getting to know our guest, Author James Offutt. Jason grew up on a farm near the town of Orick, Missouri, and in his life, he's been a farmhand, journalist, photographer, bartender, and the mayor of a small town. He's also a nerd, a Dungeons & Dragons playing, Star Trek watching, conspiracy theory believing nerd. Jason's books include the upcoming book on cryptozoology, Chasing American Monsters, Creatures, Cryptids, and Hairy Beasts, the novel Bad Day for Apocalypse, its sequel, Bad Day for a Road Trip, and A Funeral Story, the collection of short horror, Road Closed, the parody survival guide, How to Kill Monsters Using Common Household Objects, and humorous travelogue, Through a Corn-Swept Land, an epic beer run through the upper Midwest, and the paranormal titles Haunted Missouri, What Lurks Beyond, Darkness Walks, Shadow People Among Us, and Paranormal Missouri. Jason also writes a weekly syndicated humor column. He lives with his family in Northwest Missouri, where he teaches college journalism and keeps humanity safe from the inevitable invading Martian space army. We're actually having an issue right now trying to hear him. So I may have to just call him on my cell phone and put him through the speaker here real quick. So I'm going to try that, Jason. I'm going to call you really quick on my cell phone. I'm sorry we have to go that route at this point, but I'd really hate to lose you tonight because I really have a really awesome show planned. So Jason, I'm going to hang up on you real quick, and then I'm going to call you on my cell phone Skype. Thank you guys for holding on and holding in there for me. It just seems like it's one thing after another. But I'm going to call Jason here. Put him on speaker.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Sorry about that, Jason.
Technology happens.
Yeah, I know. It's supposed to make things easier, but it tends to make them more difficult. Well, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I just heard the intro you did. I spent most of my career as a journalist, and I've been teaching journalism for about 14 years. I've always been interested in all things of the all aspects of the paranormal. When I was a kid, I was that kid who would stay up late on Saturday nights to watch watch old monster movies. Whenever they'd pass out the Scholastic Book Club order forms in elementary school, my buddies would be buying biographies of baseball players and presidents and things like that, and I'd buy books on Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster. So I've been interested in this sort of stuff for a really, really long time.
Yeah, me as well. I mean, just, paranormal happenings in our life and whatnot. And, back in the day, we used to read a lot more than we do these days, besides on the internet and different articles that way. But it really piques your interest in certain topics, whatever your paranormal experience has been, or whatever you do read about on the internet or whatnot. So what inspired you to be an author, be a writer?
Well, I don't know. I guess people have inspirations to do things like this, and then there are people who just can't do anything else. I remember when I was about 10 years old, I this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to write books, and I told my parents, and I remember my dad rubbed my head and said, "Oh, yeah, that's pretty cute." And I really didn't get. I didn't get a whole lot of support from people, because that's just a ridiculous thing you hope for, right? Who writes books? Who do you know that writes books?
Yeah.
But it's just something I really wanted to do, and I worked on it to the point to where it happened. So I'm living my childhood dream. So it's pretty exciting. Not a lot of people get to say that. I'm not rubbing that in, audience.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome that you do actually get to do what you wanted to do as a child. So I've noticed most of your books are nonfiction. Are these personal experiences? Are these written from interviews you've done, or is it a combination of the two?
Yes. Again, I was a journalist for 17 years. And again, I'd always been interested in the paranormal, but I really couldn't write about the paranormal as a newspaper journalist, because they just really didn't cover that stuff. And if they did, they kind of made fun of it. It's still like that. Maybe it's gotten a little better. But when I stopped working as a print journalist and started teaching journalism, I realized, wow, I've got all this time off in the summer. I can start writing, researching and writing about, topics that I love, and my four of my first five books were on the paranormal. In those books, I did tackle, like I always had as a journalist. I did research. I went to the spots where paranormal things that had supposedly happened. I interviewed witnesses. I researched the history of the area or the house. and just went things that way. I'm a storyteller as a journalist. That's what we do. We tell people stories, try to get to the bottom of why things happened, and that's what I've done. I've had people in the past refer to me as a ghost hunter, and I've never done such a thing. I tell people stories. The people who've seen ghosts, I tell their tales.
That's awesome, because a lot of people don't really know how to get it out there. They may tell like close friends or people they really trust, but it's nice to have a mouthpiece. So that's great that you can do that for people. I've
noticed a difference though, because you're right. I mean, people. These stories are highly personal to people, and they don't want to tell everybody. They don't want to come out with it because they're afraid people are going to laugh at them. My first book, Haunted Missouri, I researched back in 2006. It came out in 2007. And I had a really hard time getting a lot of people to talk with me. One of the downfalls of the book is the southeastern corner is I didn't cover it as much as I really should have, because I couldn't find anybody to talk with me. It's a really strongly religious area of the state, and that sort of stuff doesn't happen. I noticed after that book came out, and in the years since the paranormal's become a little bit more mainstream, that people are more willing to take a chance to tell me and many other authors and radio show hosts, what happened to them, which I'm happy to see.
Yeah, it is a good thing, and it seems like more people these days are more open-minded and more accepting of such things, but there still is that fear of ridicule and judgment and, should I trust this person? So kudos to you for, like I said before, being a good mouthpiece for these guys and helping them get their story out there, because it does help, if it is traumatizing to them, it does help the healing process and whatnot. But I was reading a bunch of your stuff when I was studying up on you and trying to get this interview going, and I read one of your articles that you had written, and you wrote, words mean things, damn it, use them right. And as I read, I laughed because you wrote, say plethora, I dare you. And our weekday host, Dave Scott, uses the word plethora as our drinking word in the chat room. That's what the chatters use it as. So what are your thoughts on this word plethora?
It is absolutely overused. It's an awful word. It's an example of a word that meant something specific, and it's been changed into something different. Plethora was originally a medical diagnosis that you had too much blood in your system, and it has been taken to the point to where now it just means an abundance. And I mean, it's technically, I guess, right, an abundance of blood in your system, but it doesn't mean that. When if I could go over to somebody's house, hey, would you like something to drink? I have a plethora of drink choices. I automatically think, oh, too much blood in their system. They're a vampire, so I treat them accordingly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Words. They mean specific things. And my wife and I argue about this. Oh, we don't argue about it, but she points out to me that this word used to mean this and this word used to mean that. I guess plethora just gets on my nerves.
Yeah. So yeah, we've been trying to think of a word for me to use, and plethora just hasn't stuck for me. Like, I haven't really used it, and I've actually used it several times tonight, so hopefully everybody's having a good Saturday night.
And I don't remember it being used hardly at all until back in the 80s, the movie, trying to bring it up, The Three Amigos came out.
Oh, yeah.
Martin Short used it in that movie, and then all of a sudden everybody wanted to use the word plethora, so I'm blaming The Three Amigos on that.
It was a great movie. So what would you think a good word to use regularly would be for my show?
Oh, wow, you're putting me on the spot. I'll have to get back with you on
okay.
that one.
Give it some thought, and I'll move on to the next question. So you had mentioned when I was reading about you that as a child, you were looking for Bigfoot tracks in your yard. Did you grow up in an open-minded household, or where did your knowledge of Bigfoot come from at such a young age?
Okay, well, first let me take a step back. How about Prost? It's German for cheers.
Prost. That's a good one.
That's a fine one. Okay, then let's go. Okay, Bigfoot, yeah. When I was a kid, and newspaper coverage on, or just media coverage in general on certain topics has, it's evolved over the years. Back at one point, UFO stories were taken seriously by the news. Well, wait a second, it's July 7th. It's the anniversary of the alleged Roswell crash, and that was handled seriously in newspapers. And the 1960s and 1970s were when Bigfoot reports were handled seriously by newspapers, especially after the Bluff Creek, California sighting. Patterson Gimlin, when they shot their video, Bigfoot became all of a sudden mainstream. And I remembered I was a newspaper nerd even when I was a kid, and our local newspaper, the Kansas City, Missouri paper, had AP stories of a monster in my home state. Momo was its name. That's short for Missouri Monster. And that was in the early 70s. And I would read all of these stories and all these updates in the paper about a Bigfoot in my state.
Wow.
And that was something that I saw on my monster movies that I would stay up late watching, and I wanted nothing more than to see one of these. And as you mentioned in the bio, I grew up on a farm, so there were times that I'd pack some food and go out and looking for Bigfoot footprints. I'd spend hours and hours and hours out in the cornfields and walking through trees trying to find Bigfoot footprints, just because I was so fascinated that in a newspaper they had legitimate stories about a monster, and that just grabbed my fascination. I'm still fascinated by Bigfoot. If I think if any cryptid is found today, well, number one, I think the thylacine, the Tasmanian tiger, is first on my list. But number two, it would have to be Bigfoot.
So did you ever get lucky? Did you ever find a print or something that you thought resembled one?
No, I found absolutely nothing. And
dang it!
I grew up near Kansas City, and these Bigfoot sightings were all the way on the Illinois border on the opposite side of the state. So I just was walking around with my fingers crossed.
Yeah. Well, it's a good way to spend your time. After my mother passed and my dad had his downfall, we lived with our grandparents out in Pettigrew, Arkansas, which is in the middle of BFE. And that's what we did most of our days, is explore the woods and, have mud fights by the pond and other, fun outdoors things. We didn't have all these amenities that these kids have these days with their cell phones and other, time-consuming toys. I actually enjoyed it much better. Like, I kind of feel sorry for kids these days.
Right. Well, which is... We have not allowed our children to have cell phones yet, and we're going to hold off as long as possible. And we do what my wife and I do what our parents did: go outside, go outside and play. You had part of your question. I just realized I didn't ask. Was, did I grow up in an open household? And no, well, yeah, yes and no. My dad was a multi-generation farmer, and he was, everything was black and white, right and wrong. Things exist or they don't exist, and I don't want to listen about ghosts. I don't want to listen about, spaceships and little green men and Bigfoot and all this stuff. So from him, I didn't get any support on that. But my mom knew of my interest with the supernatural. It wasn't called paranormal at that point, so she talked to me about it. She said, I've never experienced anything, but I believe in the possibility. So we would have discussions about ghosts and whatnot. And she passed away, my gosh, 9 years ago now, from lung cancer. So hey, don't smoke out there, guys. Cigarettes are bad. Okay.
Okay.
Anyway, that's my
Yeah, I'm
soapbox.
sorry about that.
That's okay. But anyway, she said, I wasn't asking for that. It's part of the story.
Yeah, I know. But I'm so
yeah,
sorry. Cancer is terrible.
It's awful. When she was when she was in hospice, she said, Jason, please don't worry about me. I'm going to be okay. And I said, Mom, I'm not going to worry about you. I know you're going to be fine. Just don't come back and tell me because you'll scare the hell out of me. And that made her smile. And she goes, okay, I promise I won't come back. And I won't come back and talk to you. Well, about a month later, I was doing some work in the basement. That's where my desk always gets stuck, down in the basement. But I was doing some writing, and from the other room, I heard my wife yell, and I shot up because I thought she was hurt. And she was unpacking a box, and she was just, her eyes were big, and she looked like she'd just, been scared. And I asked her what was wrong, and she goes, well, I was just here unpacking the box, and your mother said Kim, which is my wife's name. She said Kim in my ear, and I told her to leave me alone. I was busy. So to me, that was Mom, one, coming back and telling me that she was okay, which of course she's going to do. Two, keeping her promise to me. She didn't scare me. She scared the hell out of my wife.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So how old were you when you had your first paranormal experience?
Oh, it's hard. I can't really pinpoint an age on it. It might have been 7, 8, 9, somewhere around there. We lived in what had been a schoolhouse. And my grandmother was the teacher there, and my dad and all my aunts and uncles went to school there. But it was converted into a three-room farmhouse, or 3-bedroom farmhouse, and that's where I grew up. And it, at the time, this was back again in the 70s. The building was already about 120 years old, so there was a lot of history there. I got out of my bedroom one day, and I remember it was a Saturday, and it was in the middle of the day because it was bright. All the window shades were up, and it was the whole house was bright. I walked into this hallway outside of my bedroom because it's where we kept all our books. I was going to get an encyclopedia on the dinosaurs or something like that. I always like to look at it. And when I walked in the hallway, there was a little boy standing there.
Oh, wow.
And he had brown hair. It was parted on one side, but still a little, his hair was a little bit disheveled. He had on a blue flannel shirt and blue jeans. And there was he was probably about 6. And there was no 6-year-old boy within, 6 miles of me. And we stood there and stared at each other. And I didn't know what to do because I could see the bookshelf through this kid. And it seemed like a long time that we stared at each other, but it could have been 10 seconds. I don't know. But I was staring at him, and he blinked. And him blinking, broke the, whatever little, shock that I was in. And I just turned around and went back in my room and didn't talk to I shut the door and didn't talk to anybody about it for 30 years.
Wow. That's a long time to hold on to something like that.
Well, it was one of those things when it happened to me and all up until I finally talked to my mom and sisters about it. It was just like I talked about, the people not wanting to talk to me back in 2006 because they were afraid of ridicule. I didn't want to tell anybody I saw a ghost. And then, of course, when I talked to my mom and sisters, they'd never seen anything, or at least weren't willing to admit it.
So they didn't experience the same thing. You were the only one that had seen him.
Yes.
It's amazing how those moments do, feel like forever. It could be, a matter of seconds, but it kind of feels like a lifetime. You're just in this, it seems like a different realm, of shock and awe. It's pretty interesting how that happens. So, did you and your family actually see UFOs at your farmhouse?
Yeah, and this is what I'd mentioned that about my mom never had any experiences until this point. for people who grew up in a city, you have absolutely no idea what you're missing when it comes to stars. And because out in the middle of nowhere, where there aren't any lights, on a clear summer's evening, you can see. I mean, it's just a blanket of stars over you. I looked up a lot, and since you're in Colorado, I will also point out that my aunt, her and her family lived in Denver. Actually, the family still lives out there, and we went and hung out with them a lot when I was a kid, and we'd go up into the mountains, and the stars were even clearer there because we were a lot closer. But it was one night it was planting season. On planting and harvesting, Dad was out really late, and he came in. It was like 9 o'clock at night, and we heard the truck pull in, and he just didn't come in the house. And Mom said, Jason, go out and look for him. I was about 15 at the time, and I went outside, and he was just standing, leaning against his pickup, looking out over at this farm field. There was a field between us and the next closest house, which was, I don't know, half mile, 3/4 of a mile away. And it might have even been a mile away. It was, anyway. And I asked him what he was doing, and he pointed up in the sky over the field, and he said, you see that? And I looked, and it looked like, the best I can describe it is a big hole, a hole punch, like for paper. A big hole punch was in the sky. It was just a black circle, a big black circle. And it was there over the field, and he asked me to be quiet for a second, and I was, and there was a hum coming from that direction. And he said, go get your mom. So I went and got Mom, and she saw the same thing. We all saw the same thing, this black hole in the sky, and it was emitting a hum. And then the phone rang. And since I was a kid and our phone was inside the house, they sent me inside to get it. But it was our neighbor from the farm field across the field. And he described what we were seeing, and he asked if we saw it too. Eventually, Mom went in the house and Dad went in the house, and I stood out there until the thing, got smaller and smaller and smaller, and it finally was gone. But yeah, we saw something, close to our house in the sky that I, couldn't explain. I still can't.
Did you guys have anything happen, like, maybe crop circles or any of your neighbors' cattle or anything messed with, or were they just scoping out the area? Nobody, to my knowledge, we didn't have any, no crop circles, no animals were tampered with. We would have heard, because, it was a small area. We knew all our neighbors. We would have known if something would have happened. And, no, that was it. Just, we saw something, and, our neighbor saw it too, which I thought was pretty good confirmation. Because usually when people see something there, that's it. It was just them. But independent sighting was pretty nice. Yeah, it's pretty good to have some backup from your neighbor there. I had seen something in my backyard. Dylan Redwine had gone missing, and I was holding my baby boy and thinking about this kid and hoping he was okay and warm wherever he was, and just looking out at the snowy field in our backyard, and I see this orb, and it looks like it was 3 or 4 feet in circumference, and it looked like it had flowing like liquid fire through it. There was orange, red, and yellow just swirling around in a clockwise fashion. And I put my son down, and I'm about to step out the door, and then I realized I don't know what this thing is. I don't know what it could do to me, and I got kids to raise. So I step back out into the house, and I call my kids and my husband over, and I was like, do you guys see this? I needed somebody to see it, because am I going crazy? And my 2 daughters saw it the same way that I did, but my husband had seen it as, like, he could see the outer rim of it with a bat, like a glowing bat on the inside, slowly flapping its wings. So it was odd that he had seen something different than we had, but And I've gotten other pictures of UFOs from my house and, above my backyard, and it's pretty interesting. But at the same time, it's like, what are they doing here, and what do they want? Like, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I've got thoughts and nothing to base it on other than, my own opinion. There are a lot of trains of thought, that they're here, experimenting on us or creating a breed of hybrids. I don't really pay much attention to that. I just, think, I think they're curious. One of my favorite quotes about the universe being populated is from the late Carl Sagan, who said, about the size of space, how big it is, and he goes, if we're the only planet with intelligent life, that's an amazing waste of space.
Yeah.
So I think that there are intelligent races out there, and I think there's plenty of evidence, ancient alien type evidence to show that we might have been visited at one point. They might have actually helped us out during during the early periods of our of humans' existence. But other than exploration, I don't want to speculate on any of the others. There's also a thought that it gained popularity. I don't know if it's still as popular as it was a few years ago, but that UFOs are mainly a religious thing, that they're religious entities under the guise of extraterrestrials, which I don't like that opinion at all.
Yeah, it's interesting. And who knows what they are until we finally get that disclosure that we've been looking for.
Well, and it's like, it's one of those things that, they're here to, create a race of hybrids, or that's what the black-eyed kids are, is hybrid aliens, or they're all the spaceships we see are piloted by demons. That's all taking one unknown, things that we see in the night sky, and coupling it with another unknown, and that really doesn't make any sense, and it's a bit lazy to me.
Yeah, definitely. So, did you have any other paranormal experiences at the farmhouse besides the UFO and the little boy in the plaid?
Right. Yeah. One more is the last thing that I had. Other than hearing 120-year-old house creak at night.
Yeah.
Other than that, I was maybe 9 or 10, and since we grew up in the country, we didn't have to have our blinds pulled because we didn't have neighbors to, peek into our house. So if it was a clear night and the moon was out, the house was well lit. My room was a uniform shade of gray, and I remember this one night I just sat down into bed and turned the light off and laid down, and I could see everything. I could see my closet door, which was shut. Of course, you got to keep your closet door shut.
Yeah.
Yeah. I could see my desk, my bookshelf, the Farrah Fawcett poster, the one with the red bikini.
Yeah, you gotta have it.
gotta have it. Any kid my age had to have that poster.
Yeah.
So I could see all that, and then there was this one corner of my room was a lot darker than it should have been. It was black, and something moved. Something stepped out of it, and it was in the shape of a man, and he was extremely tall. Of course, I was about 9 or 10 years old, laying in bed, but he seemed incredibly tall and two-dimensional, and he was moving like the badly drawn cartoons, badly animated cartoons from the early 70s. Like, I don't know if you ever saw the Star Trek, the animated series, but that type of herky-jerky animation.
Yeah.
And it walked in that way right past my bed and into the hallway. and I couldn't see any detail. It was just a shape. And so as soon as it walked out of the room, I screamed bloody murder. My dad dropped a cuss word in the other room, turned on the light, walked down the hallway, and came in to see what was going on. And I told him that there was a man in my room, and he looked, and he's like, "There's nobody here. Go to bed." And that was the first of many nights over a 3, 4, 5 month period, to where not every night, but on some nights, out of that corner of the room, a black figure would come out. And sometimes there were 4, 5, 6, kind of like a line. And they never took notice of me, which is good because I might have, wet the bed as a 10-year-old. But they would walk past me and into the hallway and, like they were going from, point A to point B. And in my head, I'd always called them shadow people, even though I'd never heard that term until the 1990s and Art Bell started talking about them.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I saw that, and I had always wanted to try and figure out what they were, and that was my second book on the paranormal was a book on shadow people, trying to answer the question of what are they.
So did he only appear to you once, or did this happen on several different occasions?
Well, yeah. It's like I said, over about a 3, 4, 5 month period. One shadow being one up to 6 or 7 on not every night, but occasionally would walk out of the wall and walk by my bed and disappear into the hallway. Wow. So I saw it quite a few times during that few month period, and then it just stopped.
So, what do you think? This may have been a shadow person, or perhaps this was a ghost, like a residual ghost, being that it was walking a certain path always.
Well, but then, yeah, I had thought about that, but if it was a residual ghost, I would have seen it probably more than just that brief few month time period.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they were shadow beings. When I did my research, I kind of condensed shadow people encounters into different categories, and this category I referred to as benign shadow people because they didn't take any notice to me. They just looked like they were going somewhere, and my room was just in between. It was part of their path, and maybe after that few month period, the path changed, or people just didn't want to hang out in that place anymore. Kind of like Puerto Vallarta. People, game shows don't send people there anymore.
Yeah.
That was it.
So you live in Missouri, the Show Me State, and you have also written a couple books about Missouri. Paranormal Missouri, Show Me Your Monsters, as well as Haunted Missouri, a ghostly guide to the Show Me State's most spirited spots. Can you tell us more about this spirited state, its ghosts and monsters? And in particular, we have people in the chat room asking, what is Momo?
Well, Momo was the Bigfoot I was talking about earlier. In the early 1970s, that's when the sightings were. The sightings were only over a couple of week period in July 73, maybe. I might have the year wrong. But they appeared in or mostly around the town of Louisiana, Missouri, which is a small town between Hannibal, best known for the place where Mark Twain lived for a good chunk of his life, and the hometown of the unsinkable Molly Brown from she survived the Titanic. Mm-hmm. But Louisiana is between that town and St. Louis. And it all started when a girl, Harrison maybe. I'm trying to dredge this out of my memory. This girl, she was 15 or 16. She was doing dishes, and she looked out the window. Her 2 little brothers were playing outside, and as she was looking at them, she noticed something was wrong. She started looking because everything went still. Birds and insects had just gone silent. And she noticed that there was a figure in the tree line, and it was enormous and hulking. It was, probably around 7 to 8 feet tall, broad shoulders, had really long hair on it covered most of its face, and she said it was standing like it was staring at her brothers. And so she ran out of the house screaming and got their attention, and then they saw it and screamed and ran into the house. And she, when they got into the house, they shut the doors and called for their parents who weren't there. And when people came over, they couldn't find anything. But this thing started showing up at the house. And at one point, they did find some evidence that this thing was there other than them seeing it. They found really large 3-toed footprints in their vegetable garden.
Oh, wow.
And, that sounds kind of odd. Bigfoot, everybody's seen the plaster cast. They just look like an enormous human footprint. But there are a number of cases of, Bigfoot sightings, and they've got 3 toes, and this was one of them. There were, and this family was just the start. There was a farmer who reported his dog was missing. Later that day, a neighbor reported seeing this Momo creature carrying the guy's dead dog underneath his arm. And I think one of the more terrifying encounters, they were all pretty scary, but most terrifying encounters is 2 teenage girls they were late teens, were having a picnic at a park out on the outskirts of town, and they had their blanket down, and they had their food, and all of a sudden they smelled, the typical, Bigfoot skunk smell, and they looked around and they saw this thing standing and staring at them, and they, of course, panicked and screamed and got up and ran to the car, and they got in the car and shut and locked the doors, and the thing walked up to their blanket, and then the driver realized that her keys were in her purse sitting on the blanket, and the thing approached their vehicle. It stared into the vehicle, got its face right up to the window and stared into the vehicle.
Fogging up the glass.
Yeah. And eventually, it went away, and the girls got brave enough to run and get the car keys in the purse and tear out of there. But, I mean, that's, it reminds me of the scene from Cujo where the mom and the little kid are stuck in the car with the rabid dog outside. I mean, what do you do in that situation other than scream?
Yeah, scream and wait, especially when your keys aren't in there.
Right.
Man.
But yeah, those were basically the Momo encounters, and they all happened around Louisiana. There were other similar encounters that happened across the Mississippi River in Illinois, and it was, the same description was of the Momo type creature, along with the 3-toed footprint and all.
Yeah, it's interesting. I haven't really heard of the 3-toe Bigfoot footprint, but I do know that there are genetic anomalies that happen even with humans. Like my son, on his right hand, he has 2 thumbs. So I know there are genetic anomalies and mutations. So that's pretty interesting, that there are the 3-toed Bigfoot and then, the 5-toed.
Right, and there, 2 of the other cases that pop into mind are the folk monster, Fouke. If you had ever heard of the movie The Legend of Boggy Creek, it happened near Folk, Arkansas, and back in the late 60s, I believe. And it was the same type of creature and same 3-toed footprints. And the Honey Island monster down in Louisiana, it's, again, same type of Bigfoot creature and same 3-toed footprints. And I don't know why it didn't just occur to me until right now when I was describing it, but, the creature was just in certain spots in each case for short periods of time, and it had the same 3-toed footprints, and the Mississippi River's right there and goes through, Missouri and Arkansas and Louisiana. It could be the same monster. Wow, that just occurred to me. Because big feet are supposedly a lot of times travel by waterways, which would make sense. So, wow, that might just be a migration pattern.
Yeah,
okay.
it could be. And those, migratory paths can be quite extensive. So maybe it is like a certain, tribe or pack or whatever of Bigfoot that has that 3-foot imprint. Or maybe just a single one. Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
Right. And a lot of people don't realize how far some animals can travel. I mean, we've had mountain lion reports in Missouri over the years, and this isn't their stomping ground, but they migrate here. Rarely, very rarely, but occasionally, like I said, a moose will show up in the state. Well, heck, eels. Every place there are eels, they migrate to a certain spot in the Caribbean to mate, and then go back home to their respective lakes. So, I mean, animals go long ways, in their migration. So, yeah, why wouldn't a Bigfoot do that?
Yeah, and as I think of it, the longest treks I can think of are like sharks and the monarch butterfly. Like, their migratory path is amazing.
Oh, it's insane how far it is.
So, you wrote a book about like certain hot spots in Missouri where you can actually go and visit and do your own ghost hunting, or maybe have that paranormal experience in Missouri. Can you tell us more about those places?
Right. Well, this is my book, Haunted Missouri, which, I mean, I love reading books about haunted places. I always have. But one of the downfalls to a lot of those books is a lot of the places they cover are private residences. And who living in a house, whether it's haunted or not, wants to have ghost hunters staring in the window at 3 o'clock in the morning?
Yeah.
and nobody wants that. So I didn't want to do that. I wanted to write that book, but about places that people can go see that are all open to the public. So I did that. As a matter of fact, I got a call from somebody wanting to double check some information with me because their mom was going to get married at one of the haunted spots that I'd written about, and she wanted to make sure that my information, could land her, a wedding spot, which I thought was funny. But anyway, I covered places from haunted bed and breakfasts to college dormitories to the Mark Twain cave in Hannibal. I just tried to cover as many of the historic type hauntings in the state as I could, and again following that following the rule that anybody could go to it if they wanted to. I think and in those, let me take a step back. When it comes to the paranormal, ghosts are jerks. If you go to have a paranormal experience, and that is first and foremost on your mind, the reason you go someplace, they don't show up a lot of times. So when most of the places that I went to, I didn't have any encounters, but I did in a few. The Savoy Hotel, or the Hotel Savoy in Kansas City, the Limp Mansion in St. Louis, Yater Hall in Warrensburg, which I'll get to, but I think my favorite story from the whole book is about Mark Twain Cave. It's in I think it's in the Hannibal city limits now, but when Mark Twain was growing up there, it was outside the city limits, and it was discovered back in the 1830s, and wasn't turned into a show cave for a long time, but people in town knew it was there, and they tried to stay away from it, except for the kids. And Twain even wrote about this in his autobiography, Life on the Mississippi. The kids would go in, they would go. This was his basis for, Tom Sawyer and Becky Thatcher getting lost in the cave. This was the cave they got lost in.
Wow.
Well, like I said, kids would go in there, but I'm going to take a step back again. It was purchased at one point by a surgeon from St. Louis, This surgeon was trying to perfectly preserve a human body, but he knew he needed a place that had a constant temperature and humidity all year round. And he purchased the cave because it had, it's like 53 degrees all year round and constant humidity. So in order to do his experiment, he needed a body. Well, it just so happened his 14-year-old daughter died of I don't remember if it was cholera or some disease that was going around at the time.
Yeah.
So he used her. Instead of burying her in the family plot in St. Louis, he put her in a glass-lined copper cylinder that was filled with this concoction of alcohol and other preservatives, and had her taken to the cave, and that cylinder was hung from the ceiling by chains. So that's creepy on many levels, but during the time that it was just there weren't any guards. It was just his body hanging in a big bottle. And going back to the kids, the older children would take the younger children into the cave. They have their torches. They'd be walking around the cave, and they have their lanterns, and they'd be telling ghost stories. And they'd lead them back to this room that had the girl in it. And while they were telling the ghost stories, one of the older kids would unscrew the top, reach in, grab this girl's head by the hair and drag it up. And, scare the hell out of the other kids. And eventually, the townsfolk were so fed up, they complained enough that the surgeon took his daughter and had her buried in the family plot in St. Louis. But that was extremely creepy all the way around. And they do tours in there. The cave was visited a lot by people. Jesse, and the thing is, people wrote their names. They autographed it. There are autographs from Civil War soldiers who were hiding out in the cave. Jesse and Frank James hid out in the cave. Their names are written on the stone. Anyway, it was pretty well visited. It became a show cave in the 70s, I think. But the tour guides will report creepy things happening. One of the most creepy is they will see a girl with long blonde hair in an old-timey dress that is with the tour group, and they don't remember her being with the tour group to start out with. And by the end of the tour, that girl's gone.
Wow.
This one guide, former guide I interviewed, he watched the girl walk off as the people were leaving the cave, and as all the people, they were heading toward the exit, so he broke off to go follow this girl, and he walked back in the, they walked back into the room where this surgeon's daughter had once been, and the girl stopped in the middle, turned around, waved at him, turned back around, and walked and disappeared through a wall. And of course, he was pretty shaken. And when he, was done with his shift, his supervisor asked what was wrong, and he said what happened. And the supervisor showed him a picture of the little girl, from when she was alive, and he was like, "Oh my God, that was her." And then he quit.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Well, we have to go on break here in just 1 minute. Did you want to share your website really quick so our listeners can check you out on our commercial break?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. It's Jason Offutt, JasonOffutt.com. I have a blog there. I've got links to all my books. I've got a bio, contact information, all sorts of fun stuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for coming on, and you guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after these messages.
Heading to Vancouver and looking for some great nightlife? The Moose Vancouver is the place to be. Catch a game on one of the big screens, or just come rock out to your favorite 80s and 90s hair bands. Great food starting at $6.95. The Moose Vancouver is open until 2 a.m. nightly. It's easy to find near the corner of Nelson and Granville. The Moose Vancouver is the official rocking bar of Spaced Out Radio.
Find your escape where time has no limits. It's about living today and cherishing the heritage of yesterday. A spirit of adventure for what is new, with the nostalgia of the past. Your timepiece is a reflection of who you are. Life surrounded by beauty from the world around us to the soul within. EscapeWatches.com. There is no time like the present to enjoy your escape. Use promo code SMF2017 for your 20% discount today.
Coming September 28th to the 30th, it's our first annual Caribou Paracon, put on by Spaced Out Radio and the Canadian Society of Questers. 3 days of paranormal, supernatural, and spiritual knowledge in the beautiful 108 Mile Ranch, British Columbia. Tickets are $150 Canadian for the event, being held at the Spruce Hills Resort and Spa. Come watch our featured speaker, Grant Cameron, along with Lorian Fenton, David Weatherly, Ross Allison, and more. The Caribou Paracon, celebrating everything paranormal.
Are you tired of being blocked, shadow banned, or placed in jail for simply posting your thoughts on social media? Social Media Freedom can take care of that for you. Social Media Freedom is the newest and one of the best free new apps that allows you the freedom to post what you want when you want. It takes seconds to download from your app store. Come join the tribe at Social Media Freedom. It's time to set yourself free.
Are you intrigued by Paranormal Talk Radio? You'll love the new Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now, the Paranormal Radio app, free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
We're bringing scientific thought to the paranormal. Hi there, this is Spaced Out Radio scientist Chris Cogswell. Join me, Chris Zuger, and Dave Scott the second Wednesday of every month, where we break down the who from the woo when it comes to everything paranormal. We'll investigate and try to bring sensible answers to those straight and sometimes outlandish questions people have. Hey, not everything has an answer, but we'll do our best. Listen in to Reality Paranormal only on Spaced Out Radio.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com.
When it comes to the news, we look for the stories that the mainstream won't cover. Welcome to Spaced Out Radio's The Encounter. This is News Director Everett Thiemer. The Encounter is about the weird and strange stories that occur daily, and we scour the world looking to bring them to you. You can hear me with Dave Scott every Monday through Friday in our Encounter news segment. Read us online at spacedoutradio.com or check us out and give our Facebook page a like at SOR The Encounter. So come give The Encounter a read.
Are you an experiencer? Have you had run-ins with strange creatures you can't explain? ETs, Dogman, Bigfoot, werewolves? They're enough to scare the daylights out of anyone. Hi there, I'm Butch Witkowski from your 4-Cop. And on the last Monday of every month, you can listen to me and the host, Dave Scott, talk about the weird and the strange being reported on Spaced Out Radio. I'm going to bring my investigations and sources, you bring your experiences, and we'll figure out the rest together. Strange Days on Spaced Out Radio. Come tune us in at spacedoutradio.com.
You hear footsteps in the empty room above you. Don't be afraid of the things that go bump in the night. Reach for Spirit Storybox, the iPhone app the Huffington Post UK called the only ghost hunting app you will ever need. Spirit Storybox. The spirits are telling their stories. Are you listening?
Are you interested in advertising on Spaced Out Radio? Head to our website at spacedoutradio.com and click on our advertising tab. There, you will find an assortment of ways you can get your product out there with us, from radio commercials to banners and social media. Have a product you like our hosts to endorse? We can do that too. Visit spacedoutradio.com for more details.
Looking for nighttime adventure? Old school radio that delves into everything out of the norm? Then check us out at Spaced Out Radio. This is Dave Scott. Every Monday through Friday, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, we're going to take you on a wild ride ranging from conspiracies to true crime and every ghost, alien, and Sasquatch story in between. We're always live, and we're always interactive with you. So join us at spacedoutradio.com, where together, we own the night.
Find yourself constantly looking up in the sky, looking for answers? Have you had extraterrestrial contact? Are you an abductee? Looking for answers to your experiences? Hi there, I'm R. Keith Andrews, Spaced Out Radio's resident ET expert. Join me live the first Friday of every month, where I take questions from the Spaced Out Radio chat room and help you understand those from the far-off world. It's 2 hours of knowledge every experiencer should listen to. Hope to see you there.
Tonight's show and topic of discussion do not necessarily reflect the opinion of Spaced Out Radio, SOR Media, or its hosts. Listener discretion is advised. It's hour number 3 of Spaced Out Sunday with host Tessa Nicole Thomas. Follow Tessa on Twitter at Tessa TNT. Our website is spacedoutradio.com. Now back to the Rocky Mountains. Here's Tessa.
Welcome back, you guys. Thanks so much for hanging in there with us. We're on hour number 2, and we are with Jason Offutt. Welcome back, Jason.
Oh, thank you for having me.
All right, so we had ended with the cave. What was it, from Tom Sawyer with the little blonde girl? Right. And you had told me about a mansion in St. Louis?
Right. Yeah, like I said, there's generally, if you go out to haunted places, you're not going to experience anything. I mean, it's really cool if you do, but you don't usually. But the Lemp Mansion, LEMP, is in St. Louis. The patron started a brewing company back in the 1800s. He immigrated from Germany, and it at one point was a rival for Anheuser-Busch. But whenever Prohibition hit, Anheuser-Busch figured out how to continue to make money while they weren't making beer. They sold furniture and sold milk and things like that. And the Lemp Brewing Company didn't fare so well, and they lost their fortune. Well, there's a mansion. It's still there. It's a bed and breakfast. Right after Prohibition, the father, William Lemp, died. And he had a couple of sons commit suicide. I believe a nephew commit suicide. But one of his sons, Charles, had a dog. And it was a Doberman Pinscher, and everybody hated the dog. And he was going to end his life, and he knew that if he ended his life, nobody would take care of his dog. And he loved his dog too much, so he killed it.
Oh, wow.
And then he killed himself. And from that moment on, people have reported hearing a dog in the building. Even now, as a bed and breakfast, people will report hearing a dog walk across their room, even though it would have had to have walked across a really large rug. They could still hear the nails clicking on hardwood floor. People staying there have reported hearing dogs barking in the building, and they don't allow pets at all. Over the decades, even before it was a bed and breakfast, it was a halfway house for a while. People would report seeing this black cloaked figure in a top hat, and the description is what Charles Lemp looked like when he was alive. So it looks like Charles and his dog both are haunting the Lemp Mansion along with other ghosts. Well, when I went there, like I said, most of the places, if I can, I go to. Just so I can get a feel for them, so my descriptions will be spot on. And I interview people there. Well, when I went to the Lemp Mansion, I just knew that it was haunted. I didn't know any details. I was going to get a lot of them while I was there. And before I interviewed anybody, I just wandered the building. I'll get back to Charles in a second. the third floor was the servants' quarters when it was built, and at the time, again, this was 2007, maybe 2008. No, sorry, 2006. It hadn't been. I don't know what it looks like now, but then it was just bare walls, hardwood floors. Anyway, I was walking through the upstairs, and it was hot. It was in the 90s, and it was not air conditioned upstairs, so I was sweating buckets. And all of a sudden, in this hallway, I stepped into a spot that was so cold, I immediately stopped sweating, and goose pimples rose on my arms. I mean, it was 20, 30 degrees colder than what it was outside of that spot. So I stepped out of it, and it was hot again. I stepped back in. It was cold again. Out, hot, in, cold, out, hot, in, cold, and then it stopped being cold. So if it was a spirit that was causing the temperature change, I really pissed it off by stepping in and out of it so many times. But there's no explanation to me what that cold spot was. Anyway, so I went and did my interviews, and a buddy of mine from high school who lives in St. Louis, he and his wife had come with me to the mansion because they'd never been and just wanted to look around. Well, when I was ready to leave, I went and got them, and they were downstairs drinking iced tea, and they asked me how it was, and I told them that, about the cold spot, and I asked him how it was for them, and my buddy's wife said it was the weirdest thing. I was just standing here. She was wearing shorts because it was hot. She said, I was just standing here, and a dog brushed up against my leg, and I reached down to pet it, and there was nothing there. So they knew nothing about the haunting either. So I'd experienced the cold spot, and they'd experienced Charles Limp's dog. So I think that was a fruitful experience.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to say the least, and I had never really thought about animal ghosts until I lived in Mancos, Colorado, and there was actually a black cat ghost that lived in my house, and I had almost stepped on it once, and it ran into another room, and I searched everywhere for it. I couldn't find it. Another time, as I was coming out of the kitchen, it ran and darted behind the couch, and I went to look, and it wasn't there either. So it's pretty interesting how they hang around, and, especially for that dog you're talking about, what a way for him to go,
Yeah, I know. And it's... Why wouldn't animals hang around?
Mm-hmm.
Like people. There have been so many times... that so many people have told me that they'd had a dog or a cat pass, and for a month afterward, they'd hear the dog scratching at the door, or they'd be laying in bed and they'd feel a cat jump up on the bed, do those circles and then lay down. And of course, they didn't have a dog or a cat anymore. We actually had in the first house my wife and I had, there was I hesitate to say a ghost cat, but it could have been something dark and cat-like. She had a cat. It was a gray tiger cat called Smokey, and there were many times to where myself, my wife, and other family members that came to visit would misstep as they were walking because they thought they were going to step on the cat.
Mm-hmm.
Because they saw out of the corner of their eye, their peripheral vision, there was a cat at their feet. And then, they'd try to step over it, and then they'd look, and the cat would be laying on the couch, asleep. Or, it was never Smokey that they almost stepped on. So, yeah, why not?
Yeah, maybe he was astrally traveling while he was sleeping.
Yeah, well, I didn't consider that.
Yeah. So for my next question, I've noticed while researching you that you seem to know an awful lot about black-eyed children, and that's a very intriguing subject to me. What are black-eyed children, and can you tell us about your personal experience with these dark entities?
I have had no personal experience, and I am thankful for that. I had, when I first started hearing these stories, I had thought, I've got enough information to write a book on, and my wife is not all that interested in the paranormal. However, she appreciates it. And she's a really good editor, and she reads my stuff. And back when I did a paranormal column for a newspaper, she'd edit that before I sent it into the paper. And I told her I was gonna write a book on black-eyed kids, and she said, "Jason, I've never asked you this before, but I'm gonna do it now. Please don't write a book on this, because these are the only things you've ever written about that scare me. And if one shows up at my door, it's your ass."
Yeah.
So, you know, pick your battles kind of thing. I didn't write it. I was really happy when David Weatherly came out with his book, so I could just scratch it off my list.
Yeah, I was listening to one of your shows, and I thought I had heard you saying something about a movie theater marquee and some black-eyed children banging at the window, but perhaps that was...
No, you did. This was, I would have been describing the, when black-eyed kids came into the mainstream. There was a guy named Brian Bethel. There is a guy, we're friends on Facebook now. Anyway, Brian was working at a newspaper in Abilene, Texas, and he had an encounter, and he posted it online, and that was the first encounter with black-eyed kids that was ever made public that we know of. But anyway, he was going to pay his cable bill one night after work, and it was late, it was dark, and he stopped in front of the cable office. He was going to write a check and slip it into the night deposit box. And it was fairly well lit, even though it was late at night, because there was a movie theater a few doors down from the cable office, and the marquee was still lit because they were still showing movies. Well, he wrote his check, and he had his doors were locked, and one of his windows was down about an inch, and all of a sudden he realized that he wasn't alone. And he turned, and there were two kids wearing hoodies standing outside his car door. That's creepy to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
Because, if it's night and you're alone and there aren't hardly anybody around, and all of a sudden there's these two teenagers standing outside your window, they're up to no good. Well, one kid stood close to the window and the other one stood back a bit. And the one at the window looked about 16. The one who was standing back, maybe 14-ish. But the boy started talking with Brian, and he said the way the kid talked was like he was an adult. He didn't talk like a 16-year-old kid. And he said, "My friend and I were going and he named the movie. It was Mortal Kombat or something like that. Whatever was a popular movie in 99.
Mortal Kombat.
He said, we're going to see this movie, and we left our money at our home. Would you please give us a ride back to my house so I can retrieve our money?" And this was weird. Brian thought, this is weird. I don't like this. But he felt compelled to help the kid. And he said he even felt himself, he knew he shouldn't do this, but he felt himself reaching to unlock the car before panic took over. And he said no to the kid. And then the kid got more insistent. And he said, "You will take us to my house now. Let us in your car." And at that point, Brian noticed two things. One, the 14-year-old was starting to circle the car. And the way he described it was kind of like in Jurassic Park, where the Australian big game hunter is tracking the velociraptors. And he's got one he can see, and then the one who attacks him is the one who was sneaking up on him. The way Brian was describing it, that's what it made me think of. And Brian repeated, "No, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to leave now." And then he saw the kid's eyes, and they were completely black. There were no whites, no iris, nothing. And again, the movie marquee was really close by, and there was a lot of light, and he could see the marquee, shining in this guy's eyes. And seeing those eyes that were completely black, he just slammed the car in reverse and tore out of there. And he pulled out and put it in drive and was taking off, and he looked back, and he said where the kids had been standing, there's no way they could have moved fast enough to get out of his line of sight, but the kids were gone. That's the story he posted online. I interviewed him a number of years ago about this, and the story hasn't changed. He still tells the same story, and it still unnerves him because he says, I still live in the same town, and I still drive by that strip mall, and it creeps me out every single time that I go by it, and I just pray that I never see those kids again.
Yeah, so what do you think they are? It's weird how they have to have permission before they get into your house or even your vehicle, which is an extension of your home. They have to have that permission. They can't just come in.
Right, and it's sort of like the vampire legend that Hollywood's got us to believe. That's not the actual European vampire legend, though.
Yeah.
About we must have permission to get in. But I don't know. I mean, these seem to need permission to get to you, which to me reminds me more of listening to interviews with exorcists, like Art Bell did a number of interviews with Father Malachi Martin, and these experts in exorcism say that in order for a person to be possessed, they have to invite the entity in. That's more to me what it seems like that these entities are doing. What are they? I mean, who knows? They seem, they act demonic. I've also interviewed people who are, convinced that, they're the alien hybrids that I mentioned earlier. I was also contacted by somebody back when I was writing a lot about black-eyed kids, which was about the time my wife asked me not to write the book. This guy said that he was one. He contacted me by email. He said that he was one, and that they were, descendants of the serpent from the Bible. And at that point, I think I was kind of ready to be done with them too.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting and very scary because, like he was saying, like when he was first approached by them, they appeared normal, but then he had looked away and looked back, and that's when he saw the black eyes. And it's amazing how deceiving, and he found his hand on the lock on the door, but didn't remember putting it there and immediately pulled it back. It's like they have this sort of hypnotic way of talking to people and convincing them to let them in, because like you said, who doesn't want to help a child,
Right, exactly, and that's because I've gotten that question before. Why, if they are some kind of entity, why do they appear as a child? Well, I'm not sure about the 16-year-old, but I've had people talk to me about they saw somebody like a 7-year-old girl who said she's in trouble. Who wouldn't want to help that person?
Yeah.
Right.
So let's see. So you wrote the book, Darkness Walks, The Shadow People Among Us. You really did your homework and many investigations on that one. Can you tell us what exactly are shadow people, or at least your opinion of what shadow people are?
I think that they are a lot of different things that appear, that just have a similar appearance. People... when I say that, people are like, wait a second. If it looks like this, it's got to be this, right? If it looks like a ghost, it should be a ghost. If it quacks like a duck, it should be a duck. There are tons of cases in the animal world of one species looking like another. There's species of canines that look and act like cat species. How many different species of ants that to us look exactly the same that really aren't? So. What are they? They're I kind of classified them in different for their behavior, because there are distinct behavioral differences between certain types of shadow people. The main general description is they are human shaped shadows. They're human shaped. They're darker than they're darker than the night around them. Generally pitch black. You can't see any definition to their face. And a lot of times they appear to be two-dimensional. Another quality to them that is generally across the board the same is there's something not quite right. They look like a copy of a human, but not an exact copy. They might be, extremely tall. Their head might be extremely large. Their arms might be too long, or their legs might be too long. Something's just a little bit off. But again, it's their behavior that really set them off. The ones that I reported seeing, they had that herky-jerky movement. They were really tall. They were, again, to me, benign. They were just going from one place to the next. What could these be? I mentioned before kind of, poo-pooing one unknown to describe another, but, I mean, maybe, science mathematically has at least shown that there are more dimensions than just the one that we inhabit. Maybe, maybe that there are thin spots in between dimensions. The great paranormal author John Keel referred to these as window areas. Where areas of where places where more high strangeness than usual appears. Maybe it is a ghost, and that's all of the energy that it can manifest, to appear like is a shadow. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it could be a number of different things. There are also shadows that appear malevolent. They come in a couple of different categories. One being red-eyed, which fit the shadow people description, except for their eyes are blazing, glowing red. I've had a lot of reports on those, and those really creep me out. Those always, they seem to be on the hunt. They seem to be on the attack. They tend to make people feel a fear that is more deep and different than naturally just being afraid. It's the people have described it that I've interviewed have described it as it felt like they were generating this fear inside me and then feeding off of the energy. Like you've heard of psychic vampires. That sort of feeding. Mm-hmm. There's an entity people call the Hat Man because it's the shadow person wearing a fedora.
Yeah.
Really? Why a fedora? There's a person I know, actually, he's a former student of mine. Good, honest kid. God, he's probably close to 30 now. But he had told me a story about growing up in a small town in Iowa. I believe it was Clarinda, maybe. And he and his brother lived in a bedroom in the basement, in their finished basement. And there was an entity that showed up there on a regular basis, and they called it the Cowboy because of the hat that he wore. And this guy Cody told me that it would pace back and forth in one part of the room. It's like he couldn't cross a line or something. So they eventually got used to him. And then Cody graduated and went to college and didn't experience the Cowboy for a couple of years. That made him happy because he didn't really like him. And then one night he started hearing music. He was one of those guys. He's one of those guys that has to sleep with a fan on for the noise. Mm-hmm. And anyway, through the fan, he said he could lightly hear music from the 20s, like from the 20s and 30s, the big band era, coming through his fan, and he'd shut his fan off, and the music would stop. Well, shortly after he began experiencing that, he started occasionally seeing this Cowboy again. So, his initial thought, or his thought was, it found me. I left, and he couldn't find me, and now it found me again. And then he graduated and moved, to a larger town, and a couple more years went by, no Cowboy at all. And one day he was at a mall. I believe he was at a shopping mall in Nebraska, in Omaha. And his car, he went back out to his car, wouldn't start. And he was like, I don't know anything about cars.
Yeah.
So he got onto his phone because his mom knew a lot about cars. So he called her, and while he was on the phone, a shadow appeared in his window, and he's like, "Oh, Mom, there's somebody outside my car." And he turned. It was broad daylight. He turned and looked, and the cowboy was leaning in and looking in through his car window.
Oh my goodness.
And Cody said it scared him. It scared him a lot. And then it just faded out into nothing. It was gone, and his car could start. And he felt at that point that, you know, he's just letting me know that he's still with me.
Yeah,
so
and it makes
that's
you
pretty terrifying.
Yeah, it makes you wonder who it is. Like, you know, I don't see that he ever caused him harm. It was just uncomfortable being around him, and he didn't ever have that secure feeling with him.
Right. Well, this is also, you know, one of those cases where is it, you know, a separate, you know, type of entity that we don't know about, or is it just a ghost?
Mm-hmm.
Because ghosts follow people. I mean, there have been a lot of shadow people encounters. You know, because I interviewed for my book about 250 people, and a lot of the encounters sounded like, you know, a residual ghost that would just, you know, the shadow would just walk down the steps and into the kitchen and then disappear. And other types of shadow people would, you know, follow people, and they'd act like a ghost would. So, I mean, that's another explanation as to what they could be, is a ghost. I interviewed lots of people, an expert in Christianity, Hinduism, Islam. I interviewed an American Indian shaman, and this type of entities, you know, across the board. The shaman said, he gave me the Cherokee name for it, but I don't remember off the top of my head what it was. But, you know, we would call this person a medicine man, and he said that, you know, it's whenever you know, this person starts using his knowledge and abilities in connection with the spirit world for greed. When this person's, you know, becomes self-serving, he turns into something less than human. And you might see him at, you know, you can see him at Walmart, and he looks just like a normal human being, but when he wants to, and when he's going to do something wicked, he turns into one of these shadow entities. In Islam, the jinn, which the Western world turned into Barbara Eden and genies, the jinn tends to can act like this, can behave, can look like a shadow entity. Not necessarily all of them. There are jinns that can pass for human, but there are also jinn that you know, like to hang out in cemeteries and ruins, and they come across as shadows. The Catholic exorcist I interviewed, as soon as I just started to describe the entity, he finished my description for me, and he said, and I've mentioned this a couple of times about they look like people but not quite. There's something off. That's what this guy said. He said it is a fall. It's basically a demonic entity that we're, you know, people being created by God will be in God's image. These things are not in God's image, so they might take the guise of something in God's image, but something's wrong. There's something different about them because they can't look 100%. So, I mean, given that I interviewed people, I mean, literally from across the world, from, you know, North America, South America, Europe, Asia, Africa, Australia. I've got stories from all these places in my book, and from all of the religions that you know I dug into. I mean, I'd say these things are real. I mean, that's not just coming from me seeing them.
Yeah. Well, we had a question here from Renee, and she says, "Okay, Jason, I have heard of a case of the shadow man called Hat Man. I hear those are very hard to get rid of, and they tend to attach to someone for life and unable to shake. Have you heard of those cases?"
Well, yeah, Cody's was one I just described, and he can't shake it.
Yeah, the cowboy one.
Yeah, definitely. And there are cases of shadow people, sticking with people, throughout their life. There's also a shadow person, explanation that they are a bad omen or an omen of impending doom. This is another American Indian story. Is that if you see 3 women, shadows walking towards you, someone around you is going to die. I interviewed a woman who saw a shadow person a couple of days in a row outside of her window. She was like both times looked out her bedroom window, which was on the 2nd floor, and she said this was during the day, and she saw this what looked like a shadow man standing next to a lamppost. And she couldn't see its features, of course, but she said it looked like he was looking at the house across the street. And a couple days later, after seeing him for a couple days, he was gone. Well, when we take a step back, that she said people would walk around him and not notice him. So she felt she was the only person who could see him. But the day he stopped coming, there was an ambulance across the street, and the elderly woman in the house had died.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I worked with a woman who kept telling me she kept seeing a shadow person out of the corner of her eye, which didn't faze me much because she had told me lots of stories and she seemed to be a sensitive. But this started bothering her, and then fairly soon after, her husband got diagnosed with esophageal cancer, and she said during his health decline that this shadow being stopped appearing just in the corner of her eye and started appearing, more straightforward, and her husband died, shortly after.
That's unfortunate. And I have heard of people, if you're near a vortex or a portal and there's a lot of dead energy around, aka ghosts and such, that can cause illnesses and sicknesses within you. And, shadow people in particular, being at nursing homes quite a bit, waiting for people to die, and I don't know, it's really odd. But you were saying that you have talked to natives and shaman and such. Have you, in talking to those guys, have you heard anything about skinwalkers?
That's a topic I haven't dug into. I mean, I'm aware of what they are, but yeah, there's certain entities that I just have not heard. I have not wanted to dig in. I have not wanted to dig into, and that's one of them. Yeah, entities don't generally worry me, but skinwalkers are, they're pretty scary.
Yeah, it is definitely scary. We have them in our area of the world, and I don't know. I think it's more of like an old magic and some sort of, I don't know if you would call it black magic. Some people do have to take a life in order to gain this power, but others were, during birth their mom died. So they were naturally given, that ability. But you wrote What Lurks Beyond, the Paranormal in Your Backyard. When you looked for yourself, what exactly is out there in the world? Like, what have you found through your personal experience, cases, and your investigation?
Well, I got the idea from the book back when I mentioned before that I'd written a newspaper column on the paranormal. I wrote it for about 4.5 years, and I noticed that I got a whole lot of stories from the Midwest, the general area where I live. So I took a map and I put a pin on my town, measured out how long 100 miles would be, and put a pencil on that end, and I just drew a circle. And I, looked for all the paranormal things I could find within that area, and wow, I mean, hauntings, of course, hauntings are everywhere, but there were also, a black-eyed kid encounter. There was a case of a guy who invented a time machine. There was demonic possession. There was a dog man. There was also the case of, this was a little bit outside my 100 miles, but it was such a cool story. I included it in the appendix, a mind-reading dog. So I found all of those things, and yeah, it was enough for a book.
Well, that's awesome. We have a couple questions in the chat room. Shar is asking, are these shadow people solid black defined outlines?
They are, the general description, and this is like the ones that I saw, it was like you peel off a fridge magnet and look at the back.
Mm-hmm.
It's just black and two-dimensional. And it's just, if that fridge magnet was in the shape of a man, that's what a shadow person would look like.
Okay, and Kevin was asking, he says, no joking, I have had a shadow person outside that I have seen across the street, mainly on a neighbor's porch. He is always wearing a hat. I had no idea the whole hat thing was an issue. I was just annoyed that there was a shadow person that was bugging me, and I looked upon such lowly beings as negative beings. However, folks on here have constantly been saying that they are positive. That goes along with a paranormal group that is associated with our audience. What is your and Jason's take on these beings, and should I take steps to get rid of them? I have never heard a positive story about a shadow person, so I don't know where that's coming from, besides it could be a ghost manifesting itself. What are your thoughts, Jason?
Yeah, the number of people that I interviewed for my book, about 250, I've interviewed lots more people than that about shadow people over the years. And I've only had one shadow person encounter that could even be vaguely considered positive. They're all the ones that I've gathered have been negative. The one that could be positive, or could be taken as such, I talked with a guy who, his family was sensitive to the spirit world, and he was. They had a shadow person in the house, and it would, do what a lot of shadow people would, was just stare at you. It would loom, in an open doorway and creep you out, or maybe stare at you over your bed when you're sleeping, but not really do anything to you. I mean, that's bad enough. But he said he was playing when he was a teenager. He was using a Ouija board, which I strongly recommend people stay away from. But
I as well.
But he was using a Ouija board, and when he closed out his session, the thing he was talking to didn't leave the house, and he knew it was some real dark evil entity, and it stayed in their house, and it. He could feel when it came close to him. And he said when it came close to them, a lot of times the shadow person that the family called George would show up, and whenever the shadow person was there, the dark entity would go to the background. So this guy felt that even though the shadow person wasn't trying to protect him, just it being there, trying to creep him out, was keeping the darker evil from really, really creeping him out. So, that doesn't necessarily sound like it was, positive, but that's the most positive case that I have.
Yeah. I've had several run-ins with shadow people. Mostly, there was one really tall one that would just stand at the end of my bed. And shortly after my father-in-law passed, he was gone. He actually came by a few weeks ago and was standing at my bedroom door. Like, I could see him through the crack of the door. And then there was another instance when I was in Farmington, New Mexico. We were staying in a band house and laying down for a nap, because we were going to have a late night. And this room, this building was made out of bricks, and there were no windows in this room. But I could see the light coming in from under the doorway, and all of a sudden I noticed this dark figure standing by my bed, and I can't move, I can't scream, I can't talk, but then I can hear his voice, and he's not speaking out loud, but telepathically, and he tells me that he's going to take me or have me or whatnot. And I told him telepathically, no, you won't. And he laughed, and when he did, he had sharp, like, bright white teeth, like they basically glowed in the dark. And he reached down and kissed me, and when he did, it sent like an electrical shock up through my canine teeth, into my head, and throughout the rest of my body. And at that point, I was able to free my feet, like I could kick them. So I was kicking them as hard and as rapidly as I could, and trying to make as much noise as I could. And finally, my husband woke up, and he saw this figure standing over me, and then it just immediately disappeared. And I was so afraid of this being that the next day, as I'm heading to work, I'm even looking in my rearview mirror to see, is it in my back seat? Is it following me? Is it attached to my car somewhere? I mean, it was just the freakiest experience I had ever had, and quite scary.
Yeah, it sounds absolutely awful. I have people contact me on social media asking me how they can get rid of these things. And I have to preface it that, I'm not a Ghostbuster. As I said before, I'm a journalist. I tell people stories, but out of all the stories that I've collected, there have been a number of people who have successfully gotten rid of these, and it seems to be from happy noise, whether it be praying, whether it be singing, whether it be just simply laughing at the shadow being. The people I've talked to who've done this have said that it's gone away. I take that for what it's worth. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I do agree with, when you do have negative entities, whether it's demonic or something else, they do feed off of that negative energy, and it'll cause contention or other issues. If you try to rewire your responses, instead of getting angry right away, take a minute, take some deep breaths, think before you speak, and respond positively, think positively, and, make your intention positive. And like you said, sing a song or, laugh or whatnot. And it'll be, it's basically kind of like a scuba diver. They only have so much oxygen. Unless you give them more, they're eventually going to go to the surface. So these negative entities just end up losing interest in going somewhere else. Or they just don't.
That's a nice analogy with the scuba diver. I like that.
So here we have 2 more minutes before we go to break. Let's see, I had a question down here that I saw. So Jason is wondering, did any of the people that you interviewed mention sleep paralysis or blood type?
Wow, blood type, no. I think, gosh, if I remember something about Rh negative, people tend to have more paranormal type occurrences. I think mainly it's more alien abduction type thing if they're Rh negative. But again, I'm just trying to pull that from way back in my memory. I'm sorry, I just went off on aliens, and what was the question? Could you do the question again?
Well, it was blood type and sleep paralysis associated.
Sleep paralysis.
Yeah,
Sleep paralysis was. I had so many encounters. I had to stop including sleep paralysis because it could just be, sleep paralysis. Because when we are in REM sleep, our brain is pumping our body with chemicals to paralyze us briefly. Because if it didn't, our involuntary muscle twitches would keep us awake all night.
Mm-hmm.
So we're partially paralyzed when we sleep, and during REM, our brain's going crazy with dreams, and sometimes we wake up during that, and that's when a lot of the old hag syndrome type thing happens. We're in a hypnagogic state in which we are still in a dream, but we can still see the outside world as it really is, but we're paralyzed, so we panic and we can't breathe. That's really freaky to begin with.
Yeah.
Okay, and most of those encounters I didn't include because they probably were just, people, in this hypnagogic state, and their dream and reality are clashing. But there are a ton of cases where people haven't gone to sleep yet, and they've, been hit with paralysis.
Jason, I hate to interrupt, but we got to go to our second break. You guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back, and we'll get back on the topic of sleep paralysis and shadow people.
The first annual Caribou Paracon is happening September 28th to 30th in the 108 Mile Ranch, British Columbia. Brought to you by the Canadian Society of Questers and Spaced Out Radio. Come listen to our featured speaker, Grant Cameron, along with Elizabeth Anglin, Paisley Town, Mike Moran, Eric Cooper, and more. It's a 3-day supernatural adventure at the Spruce Hills Resort and Spa. Tickets for the weekend are $150 Canadian. The Caribou Paracon, celebrating everything paranormal.
Are you tired of being blocked, shadow banned, or placed in jail for simply posting your thoughts on social media? Social Media Freedom can take care of that for you. Social Media Freedom is the newest and one of the best free new apps that allows you the freedom to post what you want, when you want. It takes seconds to download from your app store. Come join the tribe at Social Media Freedom. It's time to set yourself free.
A timepiece is a reflection of who you are, and what better way to show off the real you than with an Escape watch? Escape is a lifestyle brand accessorizing your days and nights. Choose to escape and create the life of discovery that you deserve. Dream, play, unite with your own personalized Escape watch. Head to escapewatches.com. There is no time like the present to enjoy your escape. Use promo code SMF2017 for your 20% discount today.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7, with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on mobile with any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
The Call of the Wild is in Vancouver. The Moose Vancouver is one of the hottest bars and restaurants in the city. Open until 2 a.m. nightly, the Moose will rock you like a hurricane all night long. Great food with everything on the menu at $6.95 near the corner of Nelson and Granville. Get your horns up and come rock with us. The Moose Vancouver, the official rocking bar of Spaced Out Radio.
Are you an experiencer? Have you had run-ins with strange creatures you can't explain? ETs, Dogman, Bigfoot, werewolves? They're enough to scare the daylights out of anyone. Hi there, I'm Butch Witkowski from your Cop. And on the last Monday of every month, you can listen to me and the host, Dave Scott, talk about the weird and the strange being reported on Spaced Out Radio. I'm going to bring my investigations and sources, you bring your experiences, and we'll figure out the rest together. Strange Days on Spaced Out Radio. Come tune us in at spacedoutradio.com.
You know, it's hard being the bad man of ufology, but that's just the way that I like it. This is Chris George Zuger, and I'll be hanging out with Dave Scott and SOR scientist Chris Cogswell for Reality Paranormal, the second Wednesday of every month. And our job is to break it down and come to conclusions as to what is really going on in the supernatural world. I'd love for you to join us and bring your questions for us to investigate right here on Spaced Out Radio.
There's news, and there's The Encounter. This is Spaced Out Radio News Director Everett Thiemer inviting you to check out The Encounter. Our half-hour news segment every Monday through Friday night is different compared to what you're used to. Our goal is to bring you the weird, strange, and interesting stories the mainstream tends to leave out, and stories that will make you scratch your head in disbelief. The Encounter can also be found at spacedoutradio.com and on our Facebook page, SOR The Encounter. Come give us a read.
Do you want to know what's really going on in your world? Do you have questions about who you can trust in the mainstream media? Then look no further than the Rebel Planet. Come get the straight answers right here at spacedoutradio.com. Join me, Jamie Sexton, creator of Rebel Planet News, as I fill you in on the stories behind the stories. All you truth seekers, be sure to tune in to Rebel Planet on spacedoutradio.com the third Thursday of every month.
Hi there, this is Dave Scott from Spaced Out Radio, and I want you to come on a nightly journey. Starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, every Monday through Friday, you can come hang out with me and the other space travelers. We have it all from Carl the Alien bouncing on by to those misfit gnomes causing havoc. It's 3 hours of fun and entertainment on those topics the mainstream really doesn't want to touch. Come get all paranormal with us at spacedoutradio.com, and together, my friends, along with our resident guitar god Bumblefoot, we own the night.
Looking for a place to advertise at a very reasonable cost? Look no further than Spaced Out Radio. SpacedOutRadio.com has an advertising tab that you can click to check out our daily, weekly, and monthly packages to play on the radio, or our website including social media. From commercial spots to banners, we have it all. Check out our competitive pricing today.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com.
Tonight's show and topic of discussion do not necessarily reflect the opinion of Spaced Out Radio, SOR Media, or its hosts. Listener discretion is advised. Here comes the second hour of Spaced Out Sunday with host Tessa Nicole Thomas. Subscribe to us on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio. And you can follow Tessa on Twitter at Tessa TNT. Now, back to the show.
Hey guys, welcome back. We are in our third hour and we are taking calls. But before we go there, we were going to finish talking about sleep paralysis that happens to you before you actually go to sleep.
Right. Well, because I before the break I talked about sleep paralysis and what it is and the fact that if you're really in this state, probably what you're seeing, what you're experiencing, although it seems real, is probably just part of the dream state you're still in. However, the cases I included in my book, there were quite a few cases that described exactly what sleep paralysis is. However, the person hadn't gone to sleep yet. So this was, whatever they were encountering was something that this entity was bringing on to them. Which is horrible.
Yeah. I know, it's amazing and weird how our bodies work, and we think we have a certain amount of control over it until it decides to do its own thing. And then it's quite surprising. So, Jason, you have a book coming out March 8th, 2019 called Chasing American Monsters. And I noticed you had mentioned the Slide Rock Bolter of Colorado, which surprisingly I just discovered a few weeks ago when doing research for Supernatural Saturdays. So, what exactly can you tell us about this cryptid, and have there been any recent sightings?
Now, this was more of the back in the day when Europeans were inhabiting Colorado and coming out here. There haven't been anything recently, because the rock slide boulder is one of those monsters. You're like, this is absolutely nuts.
Yeah.
Because it's basically a whale with a hook on the end of its tail, and that hook hooks the top of a mountain peak, and it waits and waits for humans to walk close enough to where it lets go of the top of the mountain peak, slides down, and gobbles them up. Generally, the old mountain men or prospectors didn't fall prey to this. It was more of the people from back east who were more touristy who got gobbled.
Mm-hmm.
But in all of the stuff that I could find researching the book, I couldn't find how the monster got back up to the top of the mountain to hook back onto the to the peak.
Yeah, maybe he just kind of claws his way back up. I had read a story about Rico, Colorado, and their encounter of a rock slide bolter, and they had supposedly set up this dummy with all kinds of explosives inside of it and set it at the bottom of this mountain, and supposedly the cryptid had gone for it and did its thing, sliding down the mountain, causing a rock slide, gobbled it up, and slid into town and actually blew it up. But that's just what I read. I haven't done any more research to see if the town actually did blow up. But yeah, that was quite interesting, and like you were saying, it was more of like miners or timber folk, people that were cutting down the wood and such, and they were telling the stories possibly to keep the people out that they didn't want there to find their claims or whatever else they were fearing to lose.
I think mountain lions and bears would do it more for me.
I know. Yeah, did you hear about that story about the mountain lion that attacked the two mountain bikers in Washington State?
I'm assuming it's recent?
Yeah. It was a little over a month ago, and they were mountain biking, and the mountain lion came out and attacked one of the mountain bikers, and so the other one, using his bike, assaulted the mountain lion, and then the mountain lion went after him while his buddy that he just saved rode off into the abyss, and the mountain lion took him up to his cave and consumed him. So that was quite a way to go, and what a good friend he had.
Wow, yeah, that's awful.
Yeah.
Yeah, the mountain lion attacks don't happen that often, but yeah, when they do, they sure stand out. There was a case from 10 plus years ago. A woman was out jogging in California and was attacked and killed by a mountain lion, and the authorities went and hunted it down and killed it. And the reason this one sticks in my mind is that they found that it had two cubs, and tens of thousands of dollars poured in from people wanting to take care of those cubs. But yeah, nobody, wanted to donate money to, help this poor woman who got killed, two kids that were left without a mom. People are important out there, people.
Yeah, we gotta take care of each other. Yeah, there have been cases, and it's generally when there is a drought and there's not the normal food to consume. Like up at Mesa Verde, there was a little kid out with his family, and the mountain lion ran up and grabbed him by the head and started taking off with him, and luckily the mom ran after it screaming, and it ended up dropping the kid. But man, when it gets rough out there, they gotta eat something, and if you look like easy prey, they're gonna go for it. But mountain bikers, I would not think would look like easy prey. But dogs, when they see the wheel spinning, it kicks in that hunting urge, and they just go after it, even though it's a car with a wheel. Maybe that's the same thing that was happening with that mountain lion, or I don't know.
Yeah, maybe the thrill of the chase. I don't know. If it would come to some kind of animal, I'd rather it be a bear. The reason I'm going with bears is I read a lot of news, and I like the weird news.
Mm-hmm.
A few years ago, there was a woman who lived in Juneau, Alaska, her property butted up against forest land. She was 25, weighed about 105 pounds. She just let her dog out and heard her dog yelping, and she was like, "Oh, he wants in." So she opened the door, and at the corner of the property, she sees a black bear with her small dog in its mouth.
Oh man!
So at that point, I shut the door and get another dog. But what she did was she ran across the yard screaming, punched the black bear in the nose. The black bear dropped the dog and ran away. So, yeah, black bears are nature's quitters. I would, much prefer a bear than a mountain lion.
Indeed. So what are some of the amazing cryptids, creatures, and hairy beasts that you have discovered while doing research for this book?
There is so much weirdness. This
I know, right?
Right. The basic premise of the book was, maybe let's go a little bit similar with What Lurks Beyond. That there were the book I did with the 100-mile radius of my house, all the weird things I could find.
Mm-hmm.
What I did was I took every single state and found all the monsters in that state, and there were pretty typical ones. There are Bigfoot encounters in every single state except. I was waiting for you to answer. It's Hawaii.
I was thinking.
It's Hawaii.
Oh, okay.
Which, I mean, that would make sense. But there's Bigfoot encounters every place else. I mean, and you think like what? New Jersey, Rhode Island. Really? There's a Bigfoot encounter in Rhode Island? Yes, there have been Bigfoot encounters in Rhode Island. Yeah, Bigfoot absolutely fascinates me because it is seen places where there's fairly high human populations. Maybe they're smarter than us. But then there are also really, really odd ones. There are, the Loup-garou from Louisiana. This has to do that's French for werewolf. And apparently there are people who attractive people that will appear, just wander around at night and hit on unsuspecting people. Hey baby, you're cute. You want to come with me? And then he turns into a werewolf and eats them.
Nice.
So we've got that going, and interestingly enough, that story is also in Quebec, but it's the whole French thing. Maybe that's why they're so romantic. Hey, baby.
Hey, baby.
One of the things that is also extremely common, there's one in every single state, is a lake monster. Generally more than one. There's, of course, we've got Champ, Lake Champlain, which is borders New York and Vermont. I think it's Vermont. Is it Vermont or New Hampshire? One of the two. No offense to Vermont and New Hampshire people. I keep getting you guys confused. But it's been seen for a couple of centuries, and it's the typical Loch Ness monster looking creature. It's amazing how many of these creatures look like plesiosaurs. The same with the Tahoe Tessie, which is in Lake Tahoe. There's a lake monster that looks like a plesiosaur. There are a lot of lake monsters that look like enormous eels, but again, most of them have humps, long necks, and small horse-like heads. A number of states have had sheep squatches.
Sheep squatches.
Yes, which are how it depends. Some of them are described as being a satyr, like Pan, the Greek god Pan, with goat legs and human torso and goat horns. There have been a number of those cases, but generally the sheep squatch appears to be a bipedal sheep. Some of the I think the most famous one is from Fort Worth, Texas. It's the Fort Worth monster. There was actually a Polaroid picture taken, decades ago by a witness. They saw this thing, and it was standing on a hill, kind of a rise above them. There were some teenagers out partying, and they saw this goat man standing on this hill, and it started bleeding at them and threw a tractor tire at them.
Oh wow!
And a guy was able to snap a kind of a fuzzy picture of it. Yeah, but these things, there's a case in Kentucky, the other in Missouri, and in a few other places. The sheep squatch is pretty popular cryptid.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to check that out. I haven't heard of that one before, but there's a few that I hadn't, and I was amazed in my own state. I've lived here for so long. There were a few that I hadn't considered. One being the fur-bearing trout. I was like, really? It's like a trout with white fur on it, and there was actually a picture of it or whatever. I guess they gotta stay warm in these cold spring waters. I'm not sure what's going on with that.
Well, we, a group of us from my hometown would take a bus to Colorado and ski, when I was a teenager, and we went every year, and the adults would always be prepared for the dreaded snow snake. They always had their snake bite medicine in flasks. You got the fur-bearing creatures all over the place in Colorado.
Spiny Norman, stay away. So, have you heard anything like as far as vampires?
There was there've been a couple of vampire cases. There was actually one in Colorado in Mesa County in 2010, maybe. There was an article in Denver Post about it. She was driving near a town. I'm going to mispronounce this, probably Fruta.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Yeah, she was driving on a dirt road, and she saw a vampire, and she overturned her SUV because there was this vampire standing in the road. Long black, long black cloak, bleach white face and fangs. There have been a number of cases of vampires in Colorado. In Lafayette was one, which is east of Boulder. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, people thought there was a vampire in town. There was a guy named Fodor Glava, who was from Romania. He was a miner who came to town, and people thought he was a vampire because I guess of his accent. I don't know. But he died in 1918, and people had been rumors for years, but when he died, they're like, okay, this guy really was a vampire because a tree sprouted from his grave from what would have been where his chest was, and the people were convinced that the tree grew from a stake planted in this guy's heart.
Oh wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, I like vampire stories.
Yeah, they're so cool and different, like you were saying, different than what, Bram Stoker's or, the Hollywood vampire that we've always seen. There's so many variations, and I don't know. And now they have glittery skin vampires. It's really odd. Maybe it's to refract the light or something.
Or were shoved in lockers in high school or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, you were on a roll with these cryptids, and I kind of interrupted there with the fur-bearing trout and the vampires. Did you have more on your list there?
There's there are a lot of weird ones. Like there's the beaver shark from Georgia. It's got the head of a beaver and the body of a shark.
Oh wow!
And it swims in the lakes of Callaway Gardens and eats turtles and occasionally chases children. And this is a type of summer camp legend, but still it's kind of fun to shove those things together, a beaver and a shark. There was also one, God, what was it? Trying to think. It was in Alaska, I believe. Charlie Sheen tried to go find it. It's the were otter. That's it. So the natives of Alaska have a legend of the Kushtakaha, and they're a race of people who can transform into otters, and they're capable of also turning humans into otters themselves. These Kushtakaha turn people into otters just to, trap their souls on Earth and apparently feed on them. They can be kind. They can also drown people who tick them off.
Oh, no.
And, you know, if they're really ticked off, they shred their flesh and spill their entrails, you know, just because. Why not?
Yeah.
The local natives kept dogs to protect them against those, and the only other things other than dogs that these were-otters are afraid of are copper, fire, and being peed on. Not making that up, being peed on. Charlie Sheen, a few years ago, I'm putting this in air quotes, which is great for radio. He took an expedition.
Yes.
To go find the were-otter, and for some reason he came out there empty. He came up empty. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Maybe he had a full bladder and they were terrified of him.
Yeah. You can smell him a mile away. That's so funny.
Another type of monsters that I'm absolutely fascinated with is the living dinosaur.
Yes.
And there have been so many cases. Well, I mean, across the world, there's tons of them, but there have been more cases in North America than I would have thought. The lake monsters, if for some reason the plesiosaur survived, I'm not saying this like they did. Again, let's throw air quotes up.
Yeah.
There are plenty of plesiosaur, sightings, but there are also things like the Cadbrosaurus, which there are. Which it was probably an oarfish, which grow pretty big. But along the California coast up to Alaska, there have been reports of these enormous eel-like fish that aren't eels that look like a dinosaur throwback. There are tons of cases of people seeing living petrosaurs, pterodactyls. I pronounced that wrong. Petrosaur, pterosaur. What am I talking about? Yeah, that's the P is silent. Sorry, that's an old joke from elementary school. But,
no worries.
Anyway, there's tons of cases of people seeing these. Like one of my favorites. There were 3 teachers in 1977 in Texas driving home from a teachers' conference, and they pulled over and looked up because above them flew a pterosaur, a dinosaur. And I would think that 3 teachers would probably know what one looked like. Yeah, I know this was in the late 70s and cocaine was rampant, but teachers could never afford that. So I'm sure they knew what they were looking at. There have been cases in Oklahoma and in Colorado of people seeing what looked like small tyrannosaurs.
Mm-hmm.
Just running around. Ranging from 3 feet tall to 7 feet tall. So, I mean, could these things have survived? Crocodile did. Turtles did.
Yeah, I was, like I was saying, I did some research, and starting with my area in Colorado and all the cryptids that are here and, in Pleasant View and other places near the Four Corners area and in Arizona and New Mexico, there have been so many sightings of these little dinosaurs, and like you were saying, they could be a foot tall, looking like little T-Rexes or whatever, on up. And there was even a picture of one. Somebody thought maybe perhaps it was a pet or something that got out, and then got a picture of it and was like, that looks just like a T-Rex, but it's so tiny. And they're running all over the place. I must admit, I don't spend enough time in the desert, so I haven't witnessed such things, but there's so many accounts, like you were saying. It's very interesting, and they could have survived. Maybe they just modified in some way. Maybe they're just smaller now.
Right, which I mean, given the fact, that so many things have changed in the last 65 million years. Our atmosphere is different. Everything else is different. They would have had to have gotten smaller. I mean, there are cases around the world of these. There's the Kogamantu from Africa that are, flying winged reptiles. Like my favorite is I'm going to get this wrong, Mocalia Mamembe from the Republic of the Congo, which is, when white people went down there, they heard stories of this. The name means he who dams up rivers, and it sounded like an Apatosaurus. And eventually somebody came down with a book with a picture of an apatosaurus and a picture of a few other things, and they're like, can you show us what this Micaelia mamimbe looks like? And the natives pointed at the apatosaurus. Could there be one living in the jungles of Africa or South America? That'd be, I'm not saying there is, but it'd be kind of cool if there were.
True. Somebody just posted a picture here of the rare fur trout. And the jackalope is another one that we hear about. And of course, there's people out there in the field of stuffing and preserving animals, and they get creative sometimes. I haven't ever seen a jackalope, but I haven't ever seen a little dinosaur either.
Well, but you could see a living jackalope, because I have jackalopes. I think that's the last creature I touch in my book, because they started in Wyoming when brothers who ran a taxidermy business, one of them threw an animal on the ground to work with later, and it skidded. It was a jackrabbit, and it skidded up to a pair of antlers, and he's like, hey, I could put those two together.
Mm-hmm.
And so it kind of started there, but jackalopes were reported, many years earlier. One of the people from the Lewis and Clark's expedition, John Coulter was the guy's name. He also, after the expedition was over, he went back out. He was the first white man to see the Teton Mountain Range, what would become Yellowstone National Park. But he also, in his journal, wrote about jackalopes. And there is a disease out there that affects hares, and it gives them these awful tumors on their face that grow to look like horns.
Oh, wow.
So, the jackalope stories, like many things in this world, have some basis in fact. They're not actually horns, they're tumors, but they look like horns.
Yeah, and I've done hunting at the base of, Mesa Verde and stuff like that, and, you shoot the jackrabbit, you take it home, you clean it up, or maybe even do it in the field, and you find all these parasites and, like you were saying, tumors, and you can't even eat it. But yeah, it's funny how, some sort of deformity can pop up as a jackalope of all things.
Yeah. Well, you were talking about deformities earlier. We were talking about the Bigfoot with 3 toes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Things happen in nature. That's how evolution works.
So I'm sitting here and I'm wondering, perhaps since our Skype is down on the computer, maybe that's why we're not getting any calls. But that's not holding me back, because I have another one here. During your search of cryptids and such, did you happen to come upon a gnome? Because our weekday host, Dave Scott, he is afraid of gnomes. So what exactly are gnomes, and are they evil?
Well, gnomes, we gnomes, trolls, goblins, elves, dwarves, all of these, are European, and, in that general range, all those names are, and Tolkien gave us, pictures of, mental pictures of what all these things look like. But actually in European folklore, they're, elves, goblins, gnomes, all are the same thing. Pretty much. They're pretty much the same thing. Let me stop for a second and say that little people stories are in every culture across the world. We've the Hawaii, we've got the Minahuni. There are Native American stories all across North America. One of them, let me throw the Lewis and Clark expedition back up. Meriwether Lewis took some people to go, inspect this one hill, because the local, Native Americans said that there were little people who lived there. They didn't find any. They found some holes. that they thought little people might live in, but they didn't see the little people themselves. There are, little people stories everywhere. So gnomes don't surprise me too much. The traditional gnome that, with the tall pointed hat that we see in people's gardens, there is a Swedish legend of gnomes called they're the tomtar, and you got to leave treats out for them, like some milk or some food or a mug of beer, or they'll do mischief around the farm, like tie cows' tails together and things of that nature. Make your milk spoil, all sorts of crazy things. I once interviewed a professor of folklore at a university who told me I got interested in these because my grandma's Swedish and she still leaves on Christmas. She still leaves food out for the tomtars. So anyway, the legends are out there and have been believed. Well, I'm going to throw one more out before I continue with my gnome story. In Iceland, it's pretty famous. I've read quite a few newspaper articles on this, that they believe that elves, the spirits of elves inhabit certain stones, and if they are, planned a road out and there's an elf stone, they will move the road around the stone, because if you disturb the stone, bad things are going to happen. So, yeah, it's 2018 and we still have elves and gnomes in our system. Maybe because of this. All right, I was contacted by a woman named Tammy Thomas a number of years ago, and she had a story about a gnome. She had rented a house near just outside of Porterville, California. It was near the Tool River. She rented the place because it went out of town too. She had horses, and so her and her kids lived out there. And there was this shed on the property. Her and her kids would like to go down to the river, and the dogs would play in the water, and they'd fish and throw rocks and wave at people going by on boats. But they were always uncomfortable walking by this shed and would tend to avoid it, take the long way around. They'd also purchased a number of ducks and chickens that kept disappearing. They thought it was foxes or coyotes or something. But then one day, Tammy pulls in, her and her son pulling home. They'd gone to the grocery store, and she opened the back of the car and was getting a bag of groceries out, and she heard a laugh. And it really unnerved her, because nobody should be there other than her two daughters who were in the house. And she turned and looked, and there was a man, she said, about 2 to 3 feet tall, standing by the shed that creeped her out. And he had a tall pointed hat on. It was a red hat, and he had a dirty beard and these sharp teeth.
Oh, goodness.
Sharp pointed teeth and black eyes. It was staring at her. He was wearing a yellow tunic and pants, and just laughing malevolently, and this scared her, so she dropped the bag of groceries, grabbed her son's arm, and dragged him into the house. And when she got into the house, slammed and locked the door, her daughters were like, "What's going on?" And she's like, "Get down, get down." So they all hit the kitchen floor, and the laugh got closer and closer, and then the hat appeared in the kitchen window, which really freaked her out, because it was like 8 feet off the ground, and this thing was only 2 to 3 feet tall. Eventually the thing went away, and she took a peek outside and didn't see it, so went out and got her groceries. But she started hearing that laughter more and more often, and occasionally seeing this thing outside the house, just glaring at her and grinning with those horrible teeth. And eventually she moved. She couldn't stand it anymore. She was afraid for her children and moved. I thought this story was pretty creepy, and then I was contacted by another woman named Charlie, who her and her husband had just moved into a house outside of Porterville, California, and she contacted me because she said, I read your story, and it was so close to mine, I had to tell you. And so her and her husband and their 2 dogs and a couple golden labs and twins, young, like 2 years old. And the house was perfect for them, and they put in a koi pond. They were also, this house was also close to the water, and there was also a shed that, really creeped her and her husband out. And things were going well, and then all of a sudden she started hearing things like her husband calling to her.
Oh, wow.
And when she went to see her husband, her husband was maybe taking a nap.
Mm-hmm.
Or he wasn't even home from work yet. One day when her husband was home, they were outside doing some work in the yard, and they heard some fighting, like 2 animals really going at it. And they went to see what was going on, and the door to the shed that was always shut was open. And there was a cat that had been mauled horribly. It was still alive. And they felt terribly for this cat. And her husband said, I'll go get a shovel and take care of it. And they both left to get the shovel. When they came back, it was gone. And they said there was no way this cat could have moved because, it was in such bad shape. But, they let that pass because, whatever animal it fought with might have dragged it away.
Mm-hmm.
And then they started noticing the koi in their pond were disappearing. They figured that maybe it's raccoons. They're coming and taking our fish out of our pond. So they installed motion-sensitive lighting. And one night at about 2 in the morning, the light came on, and Charlie got up and looked. And there was a little man with a pointed hat and a beard standing by the koi pond. And she was looking at it, and it looked up, and it saw her, and it grinned. And it held up a fish. And then it bit the fish's head off and swallowed it. And she got her husband up, and he looked, and the troll was gone, or the gnome was gone. And this really bothered her. The next night, the light came on again. And it was the same setup. Her husband woke up this time and looked, and sure enough, there was this little man in a pointed red hat and a beard eating the fish out of their pond. And they called the sheriff. And the sheriff came out. They didn't say that there was a gnome in our yard, but they said there was an intruder. So the sheriff came out and, looked. He didn't see anything. And he said he found some footprints that looked like they were from about a, 8 or 9 year old kid out around their koi pond, but that's all they found. Well, they decided to take, matters, seriously. So they took the remaining fish and put them in a fish tank inside the house. And that night, the thing went crazy.
Oh.
It started screaming, and, they couldn't tell if it was cussing, but if they understood gnome, it was cussing at them.
It's like an otherworldly language or something.
Right. They'd taken its meal away. And it started screaming. They saw it running toward the house, so they went downstairs. And the thing, they said, was running around the house, and it was running super fast. They said no human could run that fast, and it was screeching and screeching. And all of a sudden, the dog started barking from the kitchen, and they realized, oh crap.
Oh no.
The dog door.
Yeah.
So Charlie said that her husband rushed into the kitchen, and she rushed afterward, and the dog door was starting to push inward. And she said it was like some, from some cop show. Her husband slid across the base. He hit his butt and slid across the floor, and his foot hit the door and shut it, the dog door, and they had a latch on it, and he latched it locked. They moved shortly after because this was too much for them. But after I got this story and I published it, I realized, what? These stories are way too close, and it's the same town.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a shed. They're describing the same shed, and they're both close to the river. So.
And what is this town again? I'm sorry.
What? Go ahead.
What is this town again?
Porterville, California.
Oh wow.
And I gave the contact information. I asked their permission first, but I traded contact information between Tammy and Charlie. And these two women got together because they still lived in Porterville. They just didn't live in the the gnome place anymore. And they both went out there, and it was the same house.
Oh, goodness.
Charlie, her husband, and her kids had moved into the house sometime after Tammy had. And the shed was gone when they got out there. They tried to talk to the woman who owned the house, and the woman didn't want to talk with them. They talked to some of the neighbors, and there was a neighbor who lived nearby, who lived in a trailer, who said that she'd never really experienced anything until recently, and she's been hearing laughter she can't explain, and something kept pooping on her living room floor.
Oh no!
And she didn't own a pet.
Yeah, like what the heck is doing that? I have never seen gnomes, but as a teenager, I think I was about 16 years old, I was staying at my sister Kathy's house. I had moved from Colorado back to Arkansas, so I'm outside of Paris, Arkansas at this point, and I'm laying in bed. I've always had issues getting to sleep because of night terrors and paranormal experiences, and I just think I'm naturally a night owl, but I see these two little fellows, and they are the size of what you would see a garden gnome or yard gnome statue, about a foot tall or whatnot. And they walk across this bookshelf type thing, which is under like this cabinet. So there's a cabinet, and then there's a space, and there's this little cubbyhole bookshelf thing. And they're walking across, and you can hear them jabbering and laughing. And one sits down on the end nearest to me, and he's sitting there kicking his feet, and he's wearing a pair of, I crap you not, overalls or coveralls. And the other one's messing with something on the counter, and then all of a sudden he runs up and tries to push the other one off, and he catches himself and lifts himself back up. And so I sit up because I'm going to go out there and I'm going to see what the heck are these things and what are they up to. And as soon as I sat up, I lost vision of them, and then went back to run into the living room and into the kitchen, and they were gone. So I never saw them again. But in this house, we'd always have items go missing, and we'd look everywhere for them, and it'd always end up in the same place we started looking. And so I just learned to ask nicely, hey, can you give that back, because that's important to me, like I need my keys or I need my lighter or whatnot, and it would turn back up. But it was pretty interesting, and they didn't seem evil to me. They just seemed like, funny little spirited creatures, humanoid looking, like they looked like little humans. They weren't as broad as, you generally see like a statue of a gnome. They were skinnier, but they were about the same height. And it was just really interesting, a really interesting experience. And I don't know if those would be considered gnomes. Like, they didn't have pointy hats, but...
Well, again, all the the European legends were, all similar type creatures. So, who says they need to have pointed hats? Yeah, I've had plenty of, encounters just like the one, that you described of, people, generally kids, seeing a number of these entities, just goofing around, goofing around in their room, and said the one pushed the other one. Yeah, they seemed kind of more playful than anything else. I talked with a guy who lived in New York City who said when he was a kid that he would routinely see a line of small people, like 5 of them, walking, and they were, like wearing coveralls and holding tools like they were just coming home from work. Which, reminds me of another book from my Chasing American Monsters, another story from Chasing American Monsters, which is the Tommyknockers. When coal mining really started in Pennsylvania, a lot of the people who worked in the mines were Cornish men from Cornwall, England, because they were really good miners, and they brought stories of with them of the Tommyknockers, which were it's got a religious start. Apparently, the Tommyknockers, according to the Cornish tradition, are little people who work in mines, who they're the spirits of the people who betrayed Christ, and they're doomed to work in mines for all eternity. And they had these stories in England, but they, like lots of stories, they brought them to the New World when they came here. But they would also report these little people dressed in miners' gear who would steal their tools, steal their lunch. Would sometimes warn them of cave-ins, would sometimes trick them into going into a place that would cave in. But it's, again, little people, either helping or being tricksters. Mm-hmm. And it's all over the place. Why? I mean, if the people from Cornwall, England brought them here to Pennsylvania, and also when the gold rush started out in California, they went there as well. They reported Tommyknockers. Probably and I point this out in the book, there's so many cases that when people go to a new world, a new land, from their old home, be it, the French to Quebec or Louisiana bring their werewolf stories, or other, European cultures bringing vampire stories, or people bringing their little people stories. It's like they didn't just bring their legends with them, they brought their entities with them as well. Hell, in South Dakota, there's a banshee. That's totally an Irish legend. So the Irish settlers had stories of this banshee that lived in the Badlands. Was it always there, or are they just naming something that is similar, or did they bring banshees with them? I don't know. It's fun to talk about.
Yeah, and that was my thought as well, like, do these things travel with people? Because, fairies are also things known from, Ireland and such. And I'm the founder of Four Corners Paranormal Investigations, and we had a case recently where this lady and her daughter were being attacked. Mostly the mother was being attacked, and, large pieces of furniture were being thrown and different messes were being made. And at first, when she talked to me, I was thinking, something demonic. And then the more she told me, I'm thinking, this is poltergeist activity stemming from her daughter. She must be, spiritually acute. She must have some sort of gift. And luckily, my team is very diverse because, I'm not very versed in fairies and such. I'm still, dabbling with ghosts and such. And luckily I had 2 crew members that knew exactly what was going on, and they told her leave out some toast with some honey on it and some milk. She didn't have milk, so she put out juice or tea or something, and the activity subsided. But also the daughter supposedly having some sort of attachment to Fey Blood or Fey Blood herself. She went to be with her grandmother just a day after we met with her. And everything was okay there until her mother video Skyped her or Facebook, called her, FaceTime, and then the activity started over there. So we've been teaching her, different things, meditative stuff and such. But, have you encountered any sort of fairy stories while doing your research?
Yeah, not really. I mean, this is the gnome ones were about it. I did interview a guy who said he dated a Fey girl for a while. She said that she was 1/4 Fey, but I mean, okay.
Yeah.
I'm not doubting you, but what the evidence is, where? Mm-hmm. And she'd get mad if you told me. So thanks for letting me know.
Yeah. Well, what about Bigfoot? We were talking earlier about, the 5-toed and the 3-toed. Do you think perhaps these are some sort of early humanoid that did make it across the Bering Strait or whatnot, like a lot of our ancestors did to get to the United States and other places? And that would kind of describe why Hawaii doesn't have this activity, because there wasn't that sort of connection with the ice sheet. What are your thoughts?
Well, this Bigfoot absolutely fascinates me because it's been reported on every continent but Antarctica, and we don't. Yeah, I mean, we don't have people who live down there that we know of. But it's been reported, you know, of course, North America, South America, all throughout Asia, Europe. Heck, there's a British Bigfoot that the Billy ape was discovered within the last 10 or 15 years and discovered by science. You know, the people who lived there knew that it was there. Which is, so the Billy ape is an enormous chimpanzee-looking creature that behaves like a gorilla. And it's very Bigfoot-esque. And it's in Australia. If Bigfoot, the Yowie is what they call it, if it ended up in Australia, why couldn't it have ended up in Hawaii?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. But, yeah, it fascinates me because there are so many stories of Bigfoot that are the same, and then there's so many variations. I mean, even in the United States, the Bigfoot is, you know, described as an 8 to 10 foot tall, you know, sometimes 12 foot tall, ape-like creature that, you know, makes nests like a gorilla and bends trees and you know, does tree knocking. But it's also described almost as often as just looking like a large, hairy human. You know, from what I've read, you know, Native Americans have considered it over the centuries as just another tribe of people. They're just big and hairy. You know, other, you know, variations in the United States are the skunk ape from Florida. Which, I mean, the picture that was taken looked kind of like an orangutan.
Yeah.
Yeah, they look different. There are also reports of Bigfoot that look more like a chimp in the United States. You know, if there was one specific, you know, description, there would probably be one specific answer. But I mean, there are so many variations. The Yeti is different than what we think of. It's smaller than what the Bigfoot's described as. Generally, we think that the Yeti's has white fur. No, that's not the case. That was, you know, what popular culture, like that Scooby-Doo episode, you know, depicted it as having white fur. But no, it's got dark fur, and they're generally one, an omen, two, a lot more violent than the North American Bigfoot seems. The Yowie is more violent than what our Bigfoot is. The Alma from Russia, heck, I'm trying to remember the name they gave it. I think it started with a Z. There was a village in Russia that captured a female Alma, which is their version of the Bigfoot, and they mated with it.
Oh,
and she
wow.
had offspring, one of whom could play the piano. So, and I mean, what are they? The Alma that they you know, the townspeople mated with. The science later dug up the son, the offspring, and he conformed to, you know, being human, except for his head looked more like a Neanderthal. So could there be, you know, as we were talking about dinosaurs, could there still be Neanderthals living out there? Well, yeah, possibly. Who knows?
Yeah.
But what is it? I mean, just a lot of the descriptions are, you know, reminiscent of Gigantopithecus, which was a 10-foot tall, upright ape that lived in Asia about the time that the, you know, land bridge went across the Bering Strait. There's in the Mormon tradition, there's a story of a pastor riding home one night, and he's confronted by an enormous hairy human. And this enormous hairy human talks to him and tells them that he's Cain from the Bible, who's doomed to wander the earth, you know, to pay for his sin of killing his brother. So I mean, there's all sorts of stories about what these things could be, and I just wish there were one, because there's too much to think about.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, there's so many different variations and so many assumptions. Like, if we could just come down to one thing, that'd be great.
Which, and I really, really hate to say this, but this is how science works. Repeatability. What needs to happen with the paranormal in order for science to accept it is it needs to be repeatable. If science was able to create, proton packs and traps like Ghostbusters and be able to catch a ghost and study it, that would prove ghosts exist. If somebody hit a Bigfoot with their car, and took it in, there would be a body. They would be able to, hey, look, there's a Bigfoot. We have the body. Until those things happen, until, a UFO lands and, an alien walks out and says, hey, okay, could you, I want to donate blood, and they take my blood pressure and, do all this stuff. It's always going to be a mystery. Which it's good for me. I can still write about it. Once it's proven, it's not going to be so much fun for me.
So what about Dogman? Have you seen a lot of those? And how far does that spread?
Well, the big ones are in Michigan, the Michigan Dogman, and in Wisconsin with Linda Godfrey's Beast of Bray Road coverage. But I mean, I've talked with people. I interviewed somebody from Chicago who ran into, not literally, almost. She and some friends were driving south of a Chicago suburb. They were out in the country, and something big was running in the field beside them. They could see, the grass waving, and all of a sudden it jumped across the road in front of the car, and all the people in the car said the thing was about 7 feet long and it had human hands. That was Wisconsin. There was a similar case in Arizona that I talked to a guy about. But there was one here in Missouri, a guy I know, and I trust this guy's, what this guy has to say. He and a buddy were at a cemetery. They like to go to this one cemetery because crazy things happen there. They mapped it out. They took a piece of paper and mapped it out because every time they went, the tombstones and trees they thought were in a different position. And every time they went and mapped it out, the tombstones and trees were in a different position. So they knew something weird was about this was happening there at this cemetery. But one night they were there, nothing strange seemed to be happening. And I don't know, about 11 o'clock they decided to go home. And it was out in the country on a dirt road. They had to go up and down a couple of hills on this dirt road covered with trees to get to this place. So they were driving down this dirt road, and they went to the bottom of this hill, and there was a big dog at the bottom of the hill. And it was like it was eating something in the road, like, a squirrel or something. And they stopped because it wouldn't move. The headlights were on it. They had the windows down. They could smell dog through the windows. And they were about 10 feet from it. And the driver, who I also interviewed, honked the horn just to want the dog out of the way. Mm-hmm. And this dog, this big dog, lots of hair, stood up on its hind legs, turned its shoulders, looked at the driver. And it was a dog face. It wasn't a wolf, it was a dog. Looked at the driver, turned back, and then it walked on two legs into the trees. And at that point, both of the guys rolled their windows up and just tore the hell out of there.
Yeah, it's so scary, Even just seeing, an entity or a ghost or whatnot, seeing something that is actually there. It could hurt or harm you. I mean, what kind of adrenaline pump or whatnot are you going to get out of that? It's just insane.
Right, and let's bring back the bear I was talking about earlier. At least I know what a bear is. I know what a bear's capable of. I know where it came from. But to see a dog stand on its hind legs, look at you like it's maybe debating what to do, and then decides that it wants to walk off on two legs into the trees. Well, yeah, what do you do with that information? How do you react at that moment?
Yeah,
you know, when I saw the ghost in my house as a kid, I was frozen.
Mm-hmm.
That was okay. I would hate to be frozen in this situation.
Right, you know, because your life could be in danger, and especially when they're stalking you. You know, I've heard stories of people being stalked by these things or followed, and like, could you imagine? I mean, I just watched a video the other day, speaking of bears, of 2 runners that were being tracked by a black bear, and it would zigzag behind them and, you know, tackle a tree basically and claw it up and then keep, you know, pursuing them. They finally made it back to their vehicle without any harm, but I mean, you know, if a bear or a mountain lion or whatever could do this, what could, you know, a Bigfoot or a dogman or whatnot do? I mean, it's just, it's insane to think about.
Right. Well, and I mean, and these people, these creatures, like Bigfoot especially, but dogmen are also reported to be really large. They're so much bigger than us, and stronger and faster, and you know, at least from a lot of the Bigfoot reports, they're fairly intelligent. Yeah, what could they do? What are they? You know, can they plot? Can they, you know, stalk our houses? I've, you know, read, you know, plenty of reports of Bigfoot stalking people's houses. You know, and they start small by throwing things at the house, and, you know, maybe raiding the garden, and then, you know, full blown beating on the walls later. That's horrifying.
Yeah, it's insanely creepy. Well, we're coming up on our last 5 minutes of our 3-hour session. Is there anything on the top of this cryptid list that we haven't talked about that you think our listeners should know about?
Oh my gosh, the bat squatch.
Oh, the bat squatch.
Bat squatch. Yeah, there are a few things in the book that I'm like, you know, this is kind of ridiculous, but it's pretty fun. And the bat squatch is one of them. It was reported about the time that Mount St. Helens blew, which would be what, 1980? Yeah. So yeah, when people started reporting, you know, around Mount St. Helens, this Bigfoot. Well, they didn't call it a Bigfoot. It was an enormous, like 8 foot tall, hairy ape with bat wings, and it was purple, and it would fly and land by your car. If you were out, you know, making out with a girl, all of a sudden this thing would fall out of the sky, and it was an 8 foot tall purple Bigfoot with wings, and, you know, it would scare you and you'd drive away. But the thing was, it just wasn't one person who said it. There were a number of people who reported this over a couple of week period to, you know, to newspapers, to area newspapers. This was a story that they covered in that area, and then Mount St. Helens blew, and you know, not many people have reported it since.
I wonder if it kind of blew up their little cave or home or something they may have had in there because it was dormant. Perhaps.
Okay, perhaps, or perhaps it was sort of like the Mothman that was sort of an omen of impending doom. Which, I mean, paranormal creatures have been, and we talked about the shadow people being omens of doom, you know, and that's what again Mothman was. Maybe that was Bat Squatch.
Yeah, they are similar, and, you know, when you had mentioned that, it reminded me of that movie, I think it was Jeepers Creepers, or something like that, where, like you said, you'd be out in your truck somewhere in the middle of nowhere making out with your girlfriend, and this creature would just drop from the sky with its bats and weird kind of looking bat face. I mean, I wonder if that's where they got that movie plot from. Because what's stranger than, you know, fact? Fact is stranger than fiction, if you ask me.
Right, Right. Well, yeah, absolutely. And a lot of those movies. I mean, not just the ones that say they got it from, from fact. There was a movie that came out 5-6 years ago, and it's called Shadow People. It's actually one of the people who co-stars is Clint Eastwood's daughter. I can't remember her name, but anyway, it was based on a couple of things. One of a Southeast Asian legend of these shadow people who die in their homes. They see shadow people who come into their homes and kill them. It was based partially on that, and it was also based partially on my book Darkness Walks. And one of the scenes that they have is exactly one of the scenes that I have in my book. So yeah, a lot of horror movies, the basis of them are actual true life accounts.
Well, I'm definitely going to have to go pick up some of your books because what was your alien story again? Alien Feast, is that what it was called?
Yeah, I not only write nonfiction paranormal, I write novels, and I write short stories. And there's a science fiction short story on jasonoffutt.com called An Alien Feast, which is what she's talking about.
Well, dang it, Jason. We're at the end of our time together, and it's been super amazing having you on and hearing all of your stories, and I know you have tons more to share with us, so it'd be great to have you back on the show sometime.
Yeah, I'd absolutely love to. I've had a blast. It's been a lot of fun. I've also drank a lot of coffee, and it's almost 2 o'clock my time, so I'm going to have a great time tomorrow.
Yeah, I hope it's not too hard on you. I also do the same thing with energy drinks, because the coffee makes me have to go to the bathroom too much. But, yeah, I do have a terrible time trying to come down from the show. But can you go ahead and share your website with us again, as well as the list of your amazing books?
Okay, yeah, it's www.jasonoffutt.com, JASONOFFUTT.com, and I've got a blog. I've got some free works of fiction on there. I've got some also on my blog free author advice if you've got any questions about things to do while writing, and links to all my books, which. My paranormal books are Haunted Missouri, Paranormal Missouri, What Lurks Beyond, Darkness Walks, and the upcoming Chasing American Monsters, which comes out in March. I've also got a few novels, a couple of zombie novels, Bad Day for the Apocalypse and Bad Day for a Road Trip, and my nerd romance called A Funeral Story.
Nice. Thank you so much again, Jason, for coming on. You were amazing. And thank you so much to everyone out there in Spaced Out Radio, Facebook, Spreaker, Twitter, Paranormal Radio, TalkStream Live, Deep Talk Radio, and wherever else in the world you guys may be listening to or in the universe tonight. I had a wonderful time this evening, and it was my pleasure speaking with you guys and getting to know Jason and sharing all of his amazing stories. And I can't wait to do it again next Saturday on Supernatural Saturdays on spacedoutradio.com. Don't forget, we are all in this together. Together we can make the world a little better. And together, my friends, we own the night. Until next time, nighty-night, love and light to all my space cases out there. You guys have a wonderful Saturday, and I will see you guys back here tomorrow night. You guys have a good night and a good Sunday, and I shall see you back here mañana.